Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, come on, come on, come on, demons. I've got this feeling, I know it's real, it's
Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and as the Demons cruised to a decisive victory over the Hawks, they paid an exorbitant toll in the form of injuries to their two pillars in defence. Joining me tonight to discuss the carnage at the MCG is longtime Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Binman, and good evening to all our listeners, especially those who have been through the 70s and the 80s and the mergers and even beyond those dates. So so there's nothing quite like beating the Hawks, especially by 9 goals.
Yeah, we went through a long period, just even before the 2018, where they just absolutely dominated us.
Yeah. There was someone on Demonland posted that Robbie Flower played 225 games, didn't get to sing the club song against Hawthorn until his final year.
Wow, that's amazing. That was a good year to celebrate. Also joining us tonight to break down all the stats that matter is our resident analyst, Binman. Good evening, Binman.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. And I completely 1,000,000,000% concur. Is there a better day on a Saturday afternoon at the MCG at the top of the Ponsford watching the D's beat the Hawks? I cannot tell you how many painful Hawks losses I've had to endure over the years and how woefully irritating their fans are. So it's just, I can't get enough of the D's beating the Hawks.
Oh, absolutely. It's a very, very satisfying indeed to beat a team that that absolutely treated us with little to no respect for a long time. We had some feedback after last week's podcast from Footles on Twitter. Footles says, "I truly love your show. This one with no exception. Win or lose, I catch you every week, and your calm delivery and knowledge is great. I live in Florida now. Dad was a Demon Premiership skipper twice, so you can imagine how I love this club. You represent its fan base so well. Go D's." Well, that is fantastic feedback from Footles on Twitter.
I had to look through the records, so he has to be the son of either.
She.
There were only three. Sorry, she. All right, there were only 3 dual Melbourne Football Club premiers and captains of premiership, which were Noel McMahon, John Beckworth, and Ron Barassi.
Well, there you go.
So we're in real royalty here. So hello, Footles.
Yeah, thank you, Footles. Each week we do ask our loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. As we always say, we love the feedback and we do read it out on the show. You know, you give us that 5 stars. It helps boost the podcast. It brings more listeners to the show, and that drives more people over to our website, Demonland, and therefore we can get more contribution from more voices to this show from our audience. The best way that you can help us out is by amplifying us in the form of these reviews, or just by helping to spread the word to your Demon family and friends. The international love continues all the way from the UK, where Josh writes, "I'm an expat Aussie and dyed-in-the-wool Demon residing in London. As a result, my connection to footy culture has been somewhat distant lately. With the time zone differences and limited access to MFC news, I've found solace in the world of footy podcasts. Among the sea of options, one gem stands out, the Demonland podcast. Hosted by the dynamic trio of Andy, George and B-Man, the Demonland podcast has become my go-to source for all things Melbourne Demons. Each episode feels like a warm embrace from home, offering a plethora of commentary, information and analysis that I sorely miss being thousands of miles away. What sets the Demonland podcast apart is its comprehensive coverage, from match reviews and previews to player interviews and everything in between. Andy, George and B-Man leave no stone unturned. As an expat craving the latest updates of my beloved Demons, their dedication to delivering timely news and insightful commentary is truly commendable. But what truly makes the Demonland podcast special is the diversity of perspectives brought by the hosts. Andy's unwavering passion for the game, Binman's keen eye for statistical analysis, and George brings balance to bridge it all together to create a perfect blend of entertainment and information. It's like having a lively conversation with mates at the pub, minus the pint in hand. Living in London, I often find myself feeling disconnected from the excitement of match days at the MCG. However, thanks to the Demonland podcast, I can still feel like a part of the action, whether it's dissecting game strategies, debating player performances, and answering questions from the audience. Listening to Andy, George, and Big Man feels like I'm sitting in the red seats at the G with my fellow Demon fans. To the team behind the Demonland podcast, I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude. Your dedication to keeping fans like myself informed and engaged transcends borders and time zones. In a city where Aussie rules, football is not even a footnote in a sports almanac. Your podcast dishes up a little taste of home. So here's to Andy, George, and Big-Man and everyone involved in the Demonland podcast. Thank you for keeping the Demon spirit alive in London, one podcast at a time. Well, thank you so much. That was amazing feedback, Josh. Aussie reviewers, our international mates, are putting you to shame. So keep that feedback coming. We really do appreciate a 5-star on Apple Podcasts. Please don't forget to click write a review link and write that review as well as giving us the 5 stars. We'll read it out on the show. If you follow us Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and you want to leave us feedback or post a question or a comment for the show, you can post under our podcast post each week or just slide into our DMs. We won't read out your full name on the show. We'll keep you anonymous. In addition to being available on Apple, Google, Spotify, SoundCloud, and or your preferred podcasting apps, the Demonland podcast is available to be watched and listened to on YouTube. Just search for Demonland Podcast to find our channel. And if you want to chat with other Demon fans, this is how we all met. You've never been to our forum, head on over to demonland.com, sign up. You can chat with other Demons fans from across Australia and around the world. It's completely free. In addition to being able to post questions and comments for the show, like we've got lots tonight, there are also multiple topics and threads discussing all things Demons related, so you're never out of the loop. So join in on the conversation. I assure you it's far superior than anything you're going to read on any social media platform. If you'd like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of the topics that we're going to talk about, then please give us a call on 03 9016 3666. That's 03 9016 3666. I'll answer, I'll put you on mute, I'll bring you on when we've got a break in the conversation. And during the week, you can give that number a call, leave us a message. We've got a couple to play on the show tonight. If you're listening to us live, you can join us in the chat room by simply heading on over to demonland.com/podcast. We'll try to be more attentive to the comments there. And I'll get my co-host to keep an eye on that. We are live every Monday, so if you want to listen to the show live, head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at 8:30 p.m.
So, Andy, just to jump in there, speaking of meeting people and making friends, I've become good friends over the last couple of years with Terence in Belgium, and I was speaking to him on the weekend, and he was saying that it's interesting with the reviews from overseas. He was saying what a key part of being connected to Melbourne and footy it is the show, and wanted to do a shout out to all the people around the world. Terence asked for a shout out, so shout out to Terence, and shout out to all of the expats and non-expats who are like British Demon. I know who listens in England, He's an Englishman who's grown to love footy and Melbourne in particular. So shout out to all the people listening in different parts of the world, and to you, Terence, in Belgium.
Well, that's all. I sort of, because we hadn't had the last couple of weeks, we hadn't had any reviews from anyone in Australia. So through the Apple Podcasts app for the creators, you can go in and sort of look at all the other countries, the other regions to find out. And that's where I found, like we had from Finland last week, we've had from the US, Canada, mostly the English-speaking countries. Didn't get any from, sort of Bahrain or anywhere like that. So we'll keep an eye out. Well, let's get into our match review. The Hawks hosted the D's at the home of football, the MCG, in our round 2 clash. The Demons were seeking to capitalise on the momentum from last week's win, whilst the Hawks were hunting for their first win of the season. But it was the D's who dominated the scoreboard early, whilst the Hawks fiddled around with the footy. However, Melbourne did suffer a significant blow midway through the first half as star defender Stephen May was forced from the field with a rib injury. Adding to Melbourne's injury woes, key defender Jake Lever also found himself sidelined with a knee issue during the third quarter, further testing the depth of the Demons' backline. Normally, the absence of our two generals in defence would send shivers down supporters' spines, but such is our defensive depth, we were able to sub in the very capable Marty Hoare and move Petty from the forward line to the back line to cover our significant losses. However, the next 2 weeks possibly without either of those two mighty pillars against better opposition will test the mettle of our defensive unit. Despite the injury setbacks down back, Melbourne's forward line clicked into gear early in the match, with Bailey Fitch providing a dominant display inside 50. Fitch's aerial prowess and accuracy in front of goal proved to be a constant threat to the Hawthorn defence as he finished the match with an impressive 5-goal haul, supported by the likes of Cozzy Pickett, who contributed 3 goals of his own, and Cade Chandler booting 2 following his 3-goal haul last week. Melbourne's forward line showcased its potency, capitalising on opportunities and maintaining scoreboard pressure throughout the game. In the midfield battle, Hawthorn made the unwise decision to tag star midfielder Clayton Oliver in a bid to curtail his influence. And despite facing relentless attention from his opponents, Oliver showcased his class and resilience and still gathered 23 possessions despite the heavy tag. With Hawthorn focusing their efforts on nullifying Oliver's impact, Melbourne's midfield depth came to the fore, with Christian Petracca being unleashed to wreak havoc all over the field, racking up 29 disposals, 11 score involvements, 8 inside 50, 6 clearances, 4 goal assists, 1 goal, and that one crucial defensive half spoil. Ably assisted by our other midfield bull, Jack Viney, the Demons' ability to share the workload ensured they maintained control of the contest, dictating play and generating scoring opportunities. Hawthorn entered the contest with a strategic emphasis on ball retention and controlling possession, aiming to disrupt Melbourne's defensive structures. However, despite their efforts to control the tempo of the game, the Hawks struggled to convert possessions into meaningful scoring opportunities. And while the Hawks may have enjoyed periods of dominance in terms of disposal and uncontested marks, they were unable to penetrate Melbourne's disciplined defensive setup. The D's defensive durability, combined with their ability to transition quickly from defence to attack, thwarted Hawthorn's possession-based game plan. In a comprehensive display of strength and resilience, the Demons emerged victorious against Hawthorn, securing a commanding 55-point win, showcasing a depth and, as George, as you aptly put it in your match report, put a fork in the Hawks, not the Demons. Gentlemen, some brief takeaways from the match, keeping in mind the topics we're going to be discussing in a moment.
I'll start off then, Andy. I think I and probably the coaches as well from Melbourne were a little bit flabbergasted by the tactics of Hawthorn. This is the sort of game plan that you saw 10 years ago, and if Hawthorn employ similar tactics against other top teams in the competition this year, they're going to face exactly the same result. I don't know that they're actually doing a genuine rebuild down at Hawthorn, making lots of comments about them and not us, but they don't have the talent there that other teams that are rebuilding at the moment have. I think they're going to be in for a long, long amount of pain, and I can't see Mitchell staying around too long if he keeps producing results like that. It was blatantly obvious from very early on in the game that when they were playing the possession game, the ball was going to go absolutely nowhere. For the 54 uncontested marks in the first quarter, they actually only entered the 50-metre mark 5 times for the grand score of 1 point. That's not going to get you anywhere remotely near a win. It's not going to get you anywhere near remotely into being competitive. It was interesting listening to Goody's comments after the match, where he said, when somebody asked him about that, he said, we're quite comfortable based on that style of play because of the impact, because of the lack of impact on the scoreboard. That style of play just in this day and age doesn't produce scores for you to win, and it was evidenced in this game. Hawthorn then swung extras around the ball. The game was well and truly over in the first quarter, and turned it into what I described as a bit of a rugby match, just trying to cut down the scoring and the bleeding that was obvious. But again, they just don't have the talent across the whole board. They've got a couple of good individuals, but it's not going to get them anywhere with the team, with the players they've got. How they can be excited about Nick Watson at pick 5, who can barely get over 5'5" or 5'6" that he is. I think that's a completely wasted draft pick on their behalf when there are lots of other capable players around. I was impressed. I was impressed particularly with the way that the team structures worked in this game. The all-team defence, and we'll talk more about that later on, absolutely denied Hawthorn any chance of moving forward. That's why they only got into the forward 55 times in that first quarter. But it was never going to be anything other than that. We had them shut down completely all around the ground. Really impressed with the way that we responded, the defence and the tactics that we employed after we lost both Lever and May. I think that was critical, and we'll talk about that for next week as well. But normally when you lose your fullback and your centre-half back in the space of a couple of minutes effectively, that would really push any defence. But the players who were allocated the task, Marty Hoare, T-Mac rolled back to the fullback position. Blake Howes was magnificent. Rivers was fantastic, and then we dropped in Salem for a good part of the last quarter in particular. It was just a seamless transition, despite the fact that we've lost 2 of our best defenders on the field. So yeah, all round a great effort by the team. Really disappointed in what I saw from Hawthorn, but not really disappointed.
Mitchell should have listened to the podcast. I don't know if it was last week or the week before. And I don't know if it was you, George, or Bin Man, who mentioned we don't mind the crossing. Teams can cross all day. That's how. As much as it just slows everything out, it allows us we get over, we set up. Set up well. Should have listened to the podcast.
Yeah, I'd invite people at the football not to look at the guy with the ball when they try to do this. Look halfway up the field that the players have already covered it off, and you know that it's either going to go to a contest or it's going nowhere at all. It's the way top teams play this year, these days.
Man, anything you want to add before your stats file? I know you said you couldn't be brief, but I'm allowing you the opportunity to try and be brave.
Well, I'll make 2 quick points and then I'll reserve the remainder of my time, Mr. Speaker, for my stats file. Just 2 quick points. Is the first one is another great day for Goody tactically. Mitchell's been regarded as the wonderkind of tactical geniuses in the AFL coaching. An up and coming tactical star. Well, he got completely and utterly crushed by Goody right down to the sub. Hoare ended up being a brilliant decision. There was a lot of queries about bringing our selections again this week.
Well, we've got a question about that.
Yeah, we got some questions about that, but Hoare was a great choice, and they had Gunston coming on, so he wasn't giving them much run when they desperately needed it. And just the other quick point, and we'll sort of touch on this different points through the show with the questions and also a little bit in the stats section, is that I really, really think it's been underappreciated and undercommented on, at least in what I've read on Demonland and in the media and listened to on the media, is that first quarter, yes, that they were all at sea, but Mitchell said in his presser that their plan was to go forward. Their plan wasn't to go side to side. And in fact, he didn't say this, but this is true. That was exactly what we did last week. He was looking to do to us exactly what we did last week. And one of the hallmarks of Goody's coaching is, as we talked about last week, I think he's underrated tactically, but he tactically responds to other teams. So he allows them to say, well, we're going to play this way, and then the team just responds to what's in front of them. And Goody made that comment in the presser. But what's been really underappreciated, I think, is that I was at the top of the Ponsford stand looking directly down. So it was back at the top of the Ponsford. Great view to watch modern footy from. And the Hawks in that first quarter were looking to go forward, but every time they looked up, that grid that we've set up, they just could not find an open player. And when they did go pull the trigger, we either interrupted it, created a stoppage from which we scored, or turned it over and scored from turnover. And then once we got to 2 goals and then 3 goals lead, suddenly they became, naturally makes sense, became much more risk averse with that kick. And so they were stuck, and we gave them that width. And so the only option that they ended up having to get it forward, that was the instruction, was to chip it around, but to go forward like we did against the Dogs, the only option they really had was to go really wide and hope that they could play on before we could get across and cover and create some overlap that way. But our running was just so incredible, led by, the best example of it was Gawn sprinting across, I forget which Hawks player it was, but sprinting across probably a 70-metre full sprint to get to the mark to stop the Hawks player being able to move the ball forward. If he didn't, bang, they're away and they're on transition and they're moving the ball quick. So, yes, it was strange tactics by Mitchell, but as he pointed out, he wasn't planning for them to be going side to side. He was planning for them for those 45 kicks and essentially do what the D's did to the Dogs, particularly in the first half last week.
All right, well, let's get into your stats files now. So take away, big man.
So I've been trying to think in the last few weeks is, well, what's the game look like? And one of the things that I didn't like, the idea of being a statistician, and I'm not really, the other thing is that I don't really think of myself, it feels a bit ridiculous to think of myself as an analyst. And so I was actually reflecting on George's report, A Fork in the Hawk, that did excellent report on Demonland for anyone who wants to read it. But there was a bit on it, so otherwise excellent, but a bit that I'd wanted to sort of push back on, and it triggered this thought in my head is, quoting from the report, from George's report, the result demonstrates how statistics are only a measure of what happens in a game rather than an indicator of the effectiveness of those actions towards producing success. And I guess that's where I differ, is because as a football fan, I was played junior footy and I played a lot of cricket, and I was a much better cricketer than I was footballer, and I wasn't a very good cricketer. So, but I played cricket into my adult. And horse racing, footy, horse racing, and cricket are my 3 great sporting passions. And the thing that I've got in common in watching them, I really think Australian rules is the best football code there is to watch. It is, I think, the best sport, full stop. I love it as a sport, and I've always loved watching it as a sport, and I've always, right from the get-go of being a football fan, I've been trying to understand the game, try to understand where it's going, what am I looking at, and for me, the statistics aren't a means to an end. That sort of notion that the statistics demonstrates a measure of what happens rather than an indicator of the effectiveness, I just think that's, for me, it's the opposite. The statistics, when you triangulate them, the old school, how many possessions are you, how many possessions does a player get, how many marks, those stats are useless. But when you triangulate them together and use multiple stats, for me, it's become an invaluable way. And, particularly since Wheelo's been putting those stats up on trying to understand the game. So first and foremost for me, always watching it. You watch the game of footy. I never even look at the stats really, except what flashes on the scoreboard of the footy. Then I come home and, if we win, I'll watch the replay. And it's only then do I go to the numbers to sort of try and get my head around not what the numbers are saying in of themselves, but what do those numbers tell me about where the game is heading? What type of game do Melbourne play? What is the sort of go-to game in football? Circa 2024, what does football look like as a sport? And I guess that's where my interest is. So that's a long way of setting up. I've been trying not to listen to media, though I broke my ban on. I've been enjoying the Collingwood, get the sort of the Liberal Tears version of the Collingwood Tears. But there's a few people that I really like, one of which is Daniel Hoyne, and he's a must listen for anyone who's interested in what the game looks like and connecting data and statistics to describe what the game looks like, not, the statistics in of themselves. And just using that example of those 52 uncontested marks by the Hawks. What's key to that number is if you include their incredibly low inside 50s in that quarter. So you combine those two and you can see it's a flawed method. But we had I think it was 30 or something uncontested marks in the Dogs game, but we had like triple or something inside 50. So suddenly those two numbers together, you can see, well, there's an effective outcome. That's what they're trying to do. So there's two clips here, and he's going to play, so that it goes on for a bit. But it's the first one is Daniel Hoyle from Champion Data talking about the modern game and what it looks like. And then the second one is him talking about the context for this is after the Swans game. He's on every Tuesday night on Sports Day on SEN. This is after the Swans game. So his sort of reference point is it's after the It's after the Dogs game. Yep, it's after the Dogs game. So his first reference point is the Swans performance, and then he talks about our performance in the Dogs game and what Melbourne is trying to do. So if you could play them, Andy, that'd be great.
Here we go.
Yeah, so this is. I just wanted to sort of drum home and just sort of really hit home this point a little bit more. And last week I mentioned the ability to be able to move the footy and the ability to be able to explode, from the back half of the ground. And if you haven't got that, with modern day footy, you are in big trouble.
Yep.
I've done a little bit further, and I've just gone into it a little bit further because it's evident to see with how the competition is going. And for so long now, for probably the last 10, 15 years, everyone keeps telling me that it's a forward half game, it's a forward half game, it's a forward half game, and that is still true. And everyone wants the game played in their forward half and to be able to score off the back of it. For the last 4 years, if I told you that the number one scoring team from the back half were the eventual premiers, and that has never been the case from a forward half game, you'd be surprised. So last year, Collingwood were the number one back half scoring team in the competition. 2022, Geelong were number one.
Tommy Stewart.
Yeah, 2020, Richmond were number one. Melbourne were number 12. They did it in a bit of a different way. But none of them have ranked number 1, 2, or 3 in their ability to be able to score from the forward half. The reality is, as I said last week, you are going to come up against a good team come semi-final, prelim, grand final day that everyone should have a strong forward half game. What is going to separate you? Have you got the ability to be able to explode? And we are seeing it across the competition at the moment. GWS are absolutely leading the way in this aspect of the game. Port Adelaide, albeit against West Coast on the weekend, so there is a bit of an asterisk there. They were unbelievable in what they were able to do. The Saints almost got over the line purely through their ability to be able to do this and implement this aspect of the game. Brisbane are struggling a little bit at the moment, but more than half of their score has come from the back half.
Which is a problem given the kitty's not there.
Yeah, of the ground. So if you haven't got the ability to be able to do that, so this is where I'll look across the competition now, and you look at GWS and you got Ash and Whitfield, their ability to be able to explode and go. You got Ryan Burton, Farrell and Houston for Port Adelaide, their ability to be able to explode, create, excite with their ball movement. Anytime Nick Blakey gets the footy in hand, things happen for Sydney. Collingwood have had a truckload of players go through there over the last couple of years. Geelong are now investing in Max Holmes behind the footy along with Mitch Duncan and Tom Stewart, to be able to excite and go. If you haven't got it, you haven't got the ability to be able to do it, you are in you're in big trouble.
Do you want to play the next one, big man?
Yeah, so this next clip is him talking specifically about Melbourne's game plan in general, and it's after we've played the Dogs. Yep.
What about the D's, Winnie?
Yeah, so we've called them straight line Ds for a little while, and no one's played straight line footy more than what Melbourne have done for the last 3 years. So in terms of straight line footy, what we're referencing is your ability to be able to take the ball long down the line. So picture a long down the line play. You've either won the ball from a mark or a free kick behind centre, and instead of switching the ball from one side of the ground to the other, or going short to a little 45 or an uncontested mark, you've simply just kicked long down the line more often than not to a contest. So Melbourne would do that more than 40% of the time over the last 3 years, which is the most of any team in the competition. And then you're sitting back there and watching Sunday against the Dogs, and that had been halved against the Dogs on the weekend. So then their ability to be able to move the ball, switch the ball, change the angles, take uncontested marks, they haven't been a marking team for for the best part of the last 3 years,
With the Goodwin era.
which has held them in good stead
Mm.
defensively. It's held them in really good shape defensively. They've been able to defend, sort of better than anyone else over the last 3 years. But their ability to be able to move it has been an issue, and we keep banging on about it. If you can't move it, you are in
Which
trouble.
is why the forward line continued to fail.
Yeah, correct. So then they do something different that we haven't seen over the last 3 years, and then their ability to be able to move it, change angles, then gets that scoreboard return going. So their ability to be able to score 15 times off the back of their ball movement game behind centre is something that we don't often see with Melbourne over the last 3 years. What it's done, though, is it might come at a cost initially defensively.
Yep.
And again, like Geelong, you're going to implement something different, which I think is the right thing to do with what they're trying to do. You've got to wear a few hits along the way. The Dogs, and this gets more to your point, a little bit, Kane, as well. The Dogs' ability to be able to move it from one end of the ground to the other was something we have not seen from a Melbourne team under Simon Goodwin. That was the worst defensive ball movement display that we have seen by Melbourne under Goodwin. You have to be prepared to wear a couple of these blows early. I think that will tighten up. The difference was the Dogs just couldn't capitalise on their work once they went inside 50, which was bizarre.
Looked like they just kept kicking it to Stephen May, but May actually just read the ball
too well, and so did Lever.
He was there before the ball got there.
So did Lever, so they actually didn't pose a threat inside 50 off the back of that. Usually, if you're getting that return from going one end of the ground to the other, you should be scoring 4 or 5 goals off the back of that. The Dogs didn't do that. So I like what they did, implement it, recognise what you need to do, but you just got to be prepared to wear a few, which is going to be interesting coming up against Hawthorn, and that's Hawthorn's strength. Hawthorn's ability to be able to move it, one end of the ground to the other, that's where they pose a threat. How that goes against Melbourne on Saturday is going to be interesting to see.
So thanks, Andy. For me, that was really both. That was in the one show. So it was last Tuesday's show. And it was really helpful for me to understand, to sort of crystallize my thinking around, what does the game look like? What do we need to be doing well, and what's different? So just a couple of things that I disagree with in that was Healy's comment about, that's why the forwards struggled. The forwards didn't struggle. They struggled to kick accurately. That's what happened. And so I would argue that that's exactly what, as Daniel Hoyne's saying, is that's what we're trying to implement this season. It's what we try to implement. It was so obvious in the Tigers game, similarly in the Blues practice game. It was too against the Swans, even though, but our inability to transition was terrible in that game. But that's because we kept on dropping the ball, fumbling, turning it over, and credit to the defensive system of the Swans made that really difficult. But since then, we've been really strong in that aspect. And then just the other thing is that the effectiveness of that front line, I think we started shifting. I talked about this on the podcast last year. We started shifting the way we were playing in that last third of the season. We just didn't have the cattle to be fully able to do it. But also the critical thing is a lot of Demonland posters have been saying, well, Melbourne should be playing this game more often in the last couple of years. It was evident the Pies were bringing in the Pies have triggered this. And I think they've triggered this model as a response to our model, though it's interesting what he's saying. It goes back to the transition from the back half, goes back to the Tigers win back in 20. I think we didn't have the cattle. So they specifically brought Billings in. They prioritised the kicking skills of, for instance, Windsor and his breakaway speed. So I think we've got the right pieces in place to be able to play that model, because if you turn it over too often, like we saw Hawthorn did, that model completely comes apart, and that's what's happening to the to the Pies. So all of that was a way of trying to now rethink about, well, what are the key indicators? What are the key core things? Last year, the key core things, the category or the indicator stats areas for me about Melbourne footy were because exactly as he was saying, with time in forward half, we're a forward half football team, is our time in forward half percentages, our metre gain percentages, of course, our defence and pressure and contest. So they were the key things I looked at to get a handle on, just looking at those numbers to get a handle on how well we played. So I think, though, that they're changing this year. So for me, those indicators, time in forward half, metres gained, inside 50s, are no longer particularly relevant. Our 3 games so far inside 50s have been pretty much 50-50. Our metres gains is less relevant, but we're up 500 in this game. Time in forward half is the big one that shifted. 60-40 was a pretty common number for us, 50-50. Sorry, I said that. And inside 50s is the other one that's not relevant. But so what does Demons football circa 24 look like? So for me, sort of thinking about it and sort of following on from what Daniel Hoyne was saying, first and foremost, this has always been the case, will always be fundamental under Goody. And it's no coincidence that this week I heard 4 players say exactly these words about Melbourne, and Mitchell in his presser talk about what Melbourne football is number 1 is defence. Number 2 is contest. Defence and contest, doesn't matter what method we play, they'll always be fundamental under Goody, and really, let's face it, it's probably fundamental under all coaches, but I think Goody and Lyon, it's even more so. It's in their DNA of both of those coaches. But to reflect the new change method, so new sort of key indicators or categories for me this year that I'll be looking at are transition, obviously exactly he was talking about, so transition, back half football, so data and information and stats that tell us what that looks like. The obvious one indicator for that is scores from defensive half. That's the key indicator, but there are others. The other one is score from turnover. That was important last year. We talked about it being 60 to 70% of all scores are from turnover, but it's critical this year. And the one area that's on watch last season across is clearances. And with clearances, I'm talking about centre clearances, stoppage, hit-outs, and hit-outs to advantage. Last season across the AFL, even with fast ball movement and scores from the back half, clearance-related stats wasn't a really super useful stat, or at least, not in the way it was, say, 10 years ago when it was really all about who won the clearances, would tell you who won the game. And because and there's a question about this later, but because we've always given up a player under Goody, or at least in the last 3 seasons at stoppages, we're 1 down at every stoppage, sometimes 2 down at every stoppage. And as Daniel Hoyne says, we're a straight line team. Even for us, when we're playing our best footy, the clearances aren't that useful stat. They're of limited value, or have been of limited value, because we lose a lot of them just because we're the numerical disadvantage. But just a watch for me is that I'm thinking that it might be increasingly a really important stat to us, and it's one that we absolutely, arguably, was the difference between Hawthorn and Melbourne. Well, it certainly is on the numbers. So I'm going to focus on those areas. So the defense, which sort of the numbers I'll be looking at, and these will change a little bit, but I'm trying to get a handle on what numbers sort of give when I'm triangulating that information that tell us how the defense is going. So the obvious one is number 1 is what the opposition score is. They only scored 38 points. And so for people screaming about, fans screaming about, well, why didn't we put him to the sword? Well, I'll tell you why we didn't put him to the sword, because 1, that's not Goody's style. He controls momentum in a game. But 2, if it's all about percentage, well, who's going to get a higher percentage between Port, who kept on going against Richmond for a 30-point win, but scored 125 points in doing so, or us, who scored 93 and kept the opposition to 38 points. I mean, that's insane on a perfect day for footy, keeping an opposition side to 38 points when you lose your 2 key defenders at halftime. It's just off the charts. Currently in the AFL, we're ranked number 1 for least opponent points per game. We're up there every year. That's after 3 rounds, but we're number 1 or 2 in that stat every year under Goody. Ranked 4th in least opponent tackles per game, and we're ranked 1st in the least opponent goal assists per game, which I think is a great number, because that means we're really shutting off that outlet, making it hard for someone to waltz into their 50 and nail a pass. And the other 2 stats, it's a bit hard to know which ones go where, but we're intercepts and intercept marks because of the importance they play in defence, but they also could arguably go in the transition from back half category. In this game, the intercepts were really interesting. We had 61 intercepts all even, so I was really surprised to see that number, that Hawks has had as many intercepts as us, but critically we had 18 intercept marks to their 12. Still not overwhelming numbers. So Hawks would have been relatively happy with the number of intercepts that they got. So the next category is contest. So the two key ones that won't change are contested possession and pressure. And then beyond that, there's a bunch of numbers that you could probably look at. And I'll pick out different ones each week. But the key ones are tackles inside 50. That the key numbers that tell me about contest, post-clearance possessions, ground ball gets, and also that's where I put the clearances as well, because if you're doing a good job in the clearances are a form of a contest that are critical, particularly, as I said, when you're one player down. Contested possessions, interesting number. We were only up, only plus 12, which was pretty consistent through the game, but 128 contested possessions to 116. So it's an interesting, Hawks. It wasn't as if Hawks weren't really, working hard at this game. It was just that first quarter made it look terrible for them. Ground ball gets, I think, is another good measure of contested possessions in terms of the contest, and we had one less than them. The other one, obviously, the key one is pressure. This is really interesting. Our numbers should be lower on this year with a different way of playing, because when you're playing on the outside and running more, which was why the Pies numbers weren't ever as insane as ours. But even in this game, our pressure was fantastic. So I was shocked in that second quarter, which was a super intense game, which almost was like an old school Melbourne game. I couldn't work out what the Hawks were trying to do other than get back to basics and stop chipping around. It was 208 to 208 in that quarter, and 201 is considered elite. So 208 is huge. First quarter, we were 184. So even though they were chipping it around, every time we had an opportunity, and I suspect the pressure number is made up of a whole lot of individual metrics, and one of them is running up and getting up on the mark and stopping a player moving forward. And that's sitting at the top of the Ponsford stand. That was so evident how well we overlapped. And as soon as the ball went forward, the player ran forward to make it difficult. That was a huge part. So 184 in that first quarter to 172 was way higher than I would have guessed just from watching it. So it indicates it was high pressure. For the match, they collapsed in the last quarter. So again, another team collapsed in the last quarter, which 133 they could only manage and I reckon, and we were 160. I'd be guessing, I don't know, this is just a guess. So the differential in that last quarter was, 27 points of pressure, which I suspect that would hardly ever happen. So I'll find out how statistically anomalous that is, but I'd be guessing we've never seen a differential like that in a quarter where we've been up. So the match was 180 and 172. So much more impressive pressure numbers from my perspective, because I guess watching, I felt like it was a relatively low pressure game. So, but geez, we were fierce at different times, and there was a series of hits we put on them that they really struggled to get up from. Our top 5 pressure players were Chandler, who had a great game again with 26 pressure acts. Nibbler, what can you say about him? Just fronts up every week. Tommy Sparrow really turned his form around, had a great game. His pressure was a big part of that, 19 pressure acts. Clayton Oliver, again, amazing. He had as many pressure acts as he did possessions, which was 22, despite having someone wearing him all day, which was another tactical fail, it has to be said. It really didn't do anything to limited him, but Track was the one they needed to control, and Track came in 5th with 18 pressure acts. That's a pretty impressive top 5. We're number 2 in the AFL for average pressure acts, just behind the Crows, which is interesting. Another big indicator, obviously, for contest is tackles. We were plus 23 for tackles, so that would have been a huge tick for the team. This was a really weird one, and so this is, it's not a good number. Tackles inside 50, they had 14. And we only had 3, so we were down 11. It's a sort of number that's a bit so sort of weird that I'd like to dig into that. It might be that, I'm not quite sure. That's a pretty low number, isn't it? So, and then defensive one-on-one losses. We only lost 10% of our one-on-ones to their 23. So that's quite remarkable. So we only lost 10% of our one-on-one losses. Amazing seeing Lever and May went off. So again, incredible that the way that they were able to maintain their system. And then clearances, and this is the one that I'm not sure about. So where that goes, these were the big numbers. We smashed them in clearances, 14-5 from the centre. We had 21. These aren't points; these are raw numbers. Stoppage clearances only +3. Hit-outs was actually -1, which was weird. Hit-outs to advantage only +3. So I was surprised. I was thinking, oh, well, their stoppages aren't that great. But then I heard Christian Petracca being interviewed, and he was quick to say Hawks were number 2 in the AFL last year. And that's another indicator. The players know these numbers like it's rote. And he said they were number 2 in the AFL for clearances last year. So that surprised me. I'd forgotten about that. Contested marks, we were +7, and I've put that in the contest because I think contested marks are critical to contest, but you could also have them in defence. We were +7 for them, which was huge. 11 contested marks. I'm not sure what the AFL average is, but I'm pretty sure it's under 11. And then finally, transition from back half. So the number one stat I'm going to be looking at this year is points from defensive half. We scored 28. Our season average is 25. I'm pretty right. I think I'm right in saying, I have to check this, that the AFL average is 27. So it wasn't actually a brilliant game from that perspective, points from back half, but that might have been somewhat related, well, probably was related to the fact that it was sitting in the back half for a lot of the time for the Hawks. They scored 28 too. So they had points from defensive half, and that's what Hoyer was saying, is that's the Hawks game. But this is what Mitchell was trying to do, is to create a incredibly strong back half team, which was why it was so weird that they didn't attack us at the beginning of the game and try and chain up handballs and put us under pressure. So, and the other big one is turnover. We were only +3 points from turnover. But really the big thing in this game, and I've put this in, I'm not sure, that's where I need to sort of think it through, but transition from back half, whether in fact clearances do fit in that. But I just think that you can't transition it, like it's part of transitioning it. You win at the source and then you trigger the movement. But our ability to score from clearances was the deciding factor in the game. We scored 9-56 from our 35 clearances. The Hawks could only score 3 points from their 23 clearances, which must be some sort of a differential of 32. I reckon must be some sort of record. I mean, certainly against the Hawks, that was an absolute smashing. Just on turnovers, 31 was below our season average of 44.3. As I said, Hawks could only score 28 points from their turnovers, 13 less than the average that we've conceded in our games. But I think that's partly due, as I said before, to the strength of our defence. And of course, Hawks not going forward, but our defence was just so miserly. Marks inside 50, I think, is an interesting one. It was 14-11, so only 3 more. But you'd be thinking if you move it really fast, you can get higher number of marks inside 50. It was certainly the case against the Dogs. Our uncontested marks, I couldn't find any stats, but I'm sure I'll be able to, would tell me our sort of marks on the lead. Uncontested marks inside 50 would be the real number. We're currently averaging only 10.3 marks inside forward 50. That's somewhat affected by how wet it was up in Sydney, how slippery it was, but that's only AFL number 12. It's no surprise, sort of lining up with the numbers from scoring from the back half that Hoyne mentioned. The same 3 teams are number 1, 2 and 3. Port's number 1, more than twice as many marks inside 50 than us, 20.3. It's twice our number. It's obviously going to be something we're going to have to control on the weekend. Giants are number 2, Swans are number 3. Interestingly, Hawks are number 4 in the AFL for most marks inside 50. And just finally, just some general ones. So the time in forward half was split 52-48, and that was, that was an interesting number. Interestingly, it was 66 in our way in that first quarter. You wouldn't have thought that with the amount of time that the Hawks spent in their back half. But after that, it leveled out basically. That stat's useful only in the sense now that it's, you want 50-50, so there's space inside 50. And just finally, just another one week where, as at least for us to consider, we were plus 14.5 for expected score in this match. And so, we took our chances, but, and the Hawks didn't take theirs. So whilst it was a very comprehensive win, again, that number's padded out by how accurate we were. And again, it was our scores from general play that was really where we did the damage. Some great work actually from running goals. So that's it for Stats Files, Andy.
I was on mute. Fantastic. Very comprehensive. Thank you. Well, let's get into our listener questions. And before we talk about the Stephen May and Jake Lever injuries and the moves that we made in game to cover for their loss and the inevitable changes we're going to make in their absence, let's just talk about our selections for last week and our use of the sub. We have a question about covering for the two generals shortly. So Ross Millen says, Binman said in the pre-game thread, and this is a quote from you, Goody said before the season, last year they planned to use the sub in two ways, tactically or as part of their load management strategy. So that was your quote, Binman. So Ross Millen continues, what is the panel's thoughts on using the sub as a load management strategy? Personally, I don't like it for the exact reason in this game you lose a key player early in the match. Note, I'm not suggesting it was used in this way for this match because I don't know if it was or wasn't. Marty Hore end up being the best replacement given the circumstances. So, B-Man, what were your thoughts on our selections for the Hawks game and in particular how we used the sub or how, not how we ended up using the sub, but choosing the sub for that game? Was it load management, tactical? Well, how'd you see it?
Oh, well, it's hard to know from the outside, but I suspect load management because in the best possible, first and foremost, they wouldn't have select Petty if they didn't think if he came on early, he couldn't play the whole game, or if he was ended up, as happened, selected on the ground and couldn't play the whole game. Hoare ended up being it turns out super well, but I thought, even for this weekend, he'd be a good sub because he's a medium-sized player, so if, the question mark on starting Petty, for instance, as a sub would be, well, he comes on, he can't replace a mid who might go down. But Hoare can go to half-back flank, freeing up, for instance, Rivers to go to the middle or giving them more flexibility to use Salo. So sorry, Andy, my mic's going in and out, is it?
Yeah, it is, but you just got to keep it close to your mouth.
Yeah, I've just got to keep it close to my mouth.
It's just behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah, so, look.
Away from your mouth, it might just be something wrong with your mic, but we'll work that out.
Yeah, no worries. It might be something. I might fix this, get rid of this mic. So he said that at the beginning of last season. Am I right in thinking the sub started last year, or was it the year before?
No, I think it was definitely 2021 because we had the sub, but are you talking about whether they changed it in terms of...
the change to last year. So he was saying that it was load, he would use it differently as the season went. And I don't know how often he uses load management because we had Maxi get injured early and we had some injuries where they couldn't use it. But it goes to the sort of idea of, the whole object of the season is to win the flag. So each of these games is part of the, you win the battles to win the war. A lot of people would hate the idea of them risking anything at this stage of the year that might reduce the chances of winning. But everything's, I think, a risk, and that they have to think through it. So if, let's say, there were no injuries last week, it turned out brilliantly that Hoare could come on for May. That was a brilliant, as it turned out. So, Goody looked like a genius in hindsight. But even if he hadn't, Hoare would have given the opportunity for them to rest Petty to get him some good AFL game time. And George will talk about this, I think, later in terms of the Casey game. Imagine Petty, that's such a lower level now. Him playing in that game, he is not going to get up to AFL speed playing in the VFL. And then... Hoare could have come on for Petty, but also Benny Brown needs a chop out. Benny Brown, we're going to have to manage for the whole season. So then you've got the flexibility of taking him off. I thought it was very clever. So I would definitely support them using the bench as a form of load management. And they're clearly, that is part of their thinking. They want to get Petty in the team. They want to manage Ben Brown. And they've used it really cleverly, I think, with Caleb Windsor as well in the first two games with a young player and not burning him out. So absolutely, I think it's part of their load management strategy, and it's a calculated gamble whether it costs a win or not. And at this stage of the year, it's about having all your pieces of the puzzle fit and firing in September.
It can be a gamble, but
it can be a gamble for sure. As it turned out, it was a brilliant gamble, wasn't it? I mean, how great was it that we barely missed a beat. What did they score in the back half of that game after May and Lever went off? I think they only scored one goal.
Three goals.
Three. There you go.
So the sub, when we selected the team initially, we weren't sure who was going to be sub, and some people were thinking that maybe one of Brown or Petty would have been the sub and they would just switch out, but we didn't do that. We played both of them together. What do you think their plan was going to be? Do you think they were going to take one of Brown or Petty off?
Yeah, I think so. That would make sense. I mean,
well, the other possibility was T-Mac.
Yeah,
whether he was sub or whether he was going to play, because he's come in as well. So I think during the season you'll see variations on the theme, and in this game, Hall was probably the best option for all options. Who would have been the other? Who would have been the other player that you would have bought into the side if it wasn't Hall?
Yeah, I thought it turned out. I mean, I thought it was a good move beforehand, but the thing about Hoare, like they could have easily been load management for Windsor as well. They did in the Carlton practice game and in the Swans and Dogs game. They did that. I mean, he is like class player. We do not want to burn that kid out. So that by using Hoare as the sub, I think that strategy gives you three players that you can tinker with. Of course, they know their kilometres they've run and their loads like to the bloody centimetre. And so they know exactly what sort of loads these players. But I'm thinking particularly Ben Brown and Petty because they're both coming back. Ben Brown only had surgery, 4 weeks ago on his knee, had a clean out, and Petty's coming back from significant foot injuries too, the toe and the Lisfranc. So, and then Windsor. And if he's doing too many kilometres, they ended up having to keep him on the field. But there's every chance that they would have ended up, maybe choosing Windsor if he was blowing up, and they wanted to make sure they've got to look after that kid because he's contested numbers, and he, like watching him live, particularly from where I was watching, he's a beast. He really hits the pack hard. He's not the sort of outside silky player that I sort of had in my mind. We don't want him to be getting, fatigued. He'll get fatigued, but we want him firing come finals.
All right, we have a caller on the line. I can already tell who this is based on the noise we got in the background. This got to be you, Enzo. How you going?
I'm going fantastic. I'm a very, very annoyed at the way Hawthorn. Hawthorn had no game plan whatsoever. They had no game plan. The only game plan they had that I could see was hitting Oliver off the ball, bumping him at every opportunity. And I think some of those bumps, either a fine or even a suspension. Like one of those bumps was so late that they're behind play. So they're not even free kicks. There should be free kicks or even suspensions because if the AFL want to take concussion seriously, those times when you get bumped when you're not expecting it, that causes whiplash, and whiplash is your head wobbling around, and that can cause those sub-concussions. And I think that's got to be stamped out of the game. That sort of, it wasn't tagging. They really weren't tagging, and they were blatantly cheating. What does the AFL want players to be targeted and bashed up? Because I don't know. I found that very disgusting. What do you think of their tactics on Oliver?
I reckon
B-Man's going to answer. I'm just going to put your volume down because your truck's very loud. So go ahead, B-Man. You should.
Sorry, Andy. I didn't actually see that at the ground or really sort of see how much sort of treatment. Part of that's that thing of not watching, not looking at the numbers and just watching live. But I didn't, I didn't even notice Oliver wasn't as sort of prolific as he had been. But when I watched the replay, they showed that. And if it's I absolutely 100% agree with Enzo. And if it wasn't Clary Oliver, like he's so strong that he did get whiplashed. And I think Enzo's spot on. If the AFL are bloody serious about knocking out concussion, well, you absolutely give that player at least the final weeks because he could have easily hit the ground with his head. Like if he was, maybe if it was Caleb Windsor, for instance, and he hasn't got 5, 6 or 8 years of AFL pre-seasons under his belt, then like Clary, maybe he hits the ground and he can't stop his head whiplashing into the ground. If he doesn't get bumped, that risk doesn't exist. And so I absolutely agree. I thought that was unbelievable that I think we did get a free, didn't we? It was at the one where we set up a goal to...
I don't think we got a 3, I think we got had a mark or something. I don't
Right.
know.
Okay. Yeah. No, I totally agree. That's just absolutely not on. And just while I think of it, Enzo, is one of the things that I don't reckon Petty got much love for is there was a question a couple of weeks ago, or maybe even it was, a couple of weeks ago about what the team should be doing about the treatment that Maxi gets. And, I think the consensus was, well, we should be looking after him. And Petty did. I love the fact that Petty went after players who went after Max. I thought we needed a bit of that, and so did Clary. And so I really love that from Petty. A lot of people sort of wondered whether he, was fit enough yet, and still question that aspect of it. But he brought an aggression to the game that we really need, and particularly as it relates to protecting Max. And if other teams are going to do that to Clary, what I want to see is not just Petty, the Sparrows and the Vineys and the, Track even, who does it as well, is to get into those players, because I agree, it's just not on.
Enzo?
Yep. Yeah, no, and I wanted to say something about Track and Oliver's kicking. I know they've both got low percentage kicking, with their percentage disposal efficiency kicking. But I reckon that just comes down to them rushing their kicks. And I think what I saw on the game with Petrarca was he was more composed, and instead of blasting away, he looked for the targets, because when he lowers his eyes and looks for targets, he's the best kick in the AFL when he takes his time and sizes up the targets. He's one of the best kicks in the AFL. It's just half the time he's rushing his kicks. And same with Oliver. Oliver's a great kick too, but he's got to not rush his kicks and just take time and pick out the targets. And if those two did that we would have produced a lot more marks inside the forward 50, I'd say. So I think you'll notice Petrarca's going to have a lot more goal assists this year than he did in previous years.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Well, I'm going to leave you there, Enzo. Thank you for your call. We always appreciate it, and we'll move on. I absolutely agree with that in terms of their both of their kicking. And Petracca has a really beautiful kick at times, but sometimes
it was a couple of magnificent
terrible.
Yesterday.
I know.
I'm taking credit for Fritter's performance and Track's performance after bagging him last week. Both of them just came good this week.
I think it was actually a lot easier to understand that. It's because Hawthorn's mids were so pathetic, concentrating on Oliver. They just let Petrarca off the leash. He had so much space. So did Sparrow. It was so it's not surprising their kicking was so much better. There was no pressure on them.
Up a bit later in this after this next question, there's a clip that I'm going to play from Rivers. But in that same interview, it was on, I can't remember what it was on. It was on SEN, I think. In that same interview, Riv said about the use of McGuinness, and we talked about this the last 2-3 years about clamping down on Oliver. He said, "Look, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
Because what it allows us to do is, quote unquote, move McGuinness around and get him away from the contest. McGuinness is one of their best mids, and so Clary was taking him away from the contest. This is Rivers, and at one point you could see like that goal where, I think Track got it and kicked to Van Ruin, which was just like pure football. How could you leave that player by himself at the back? I know his opponent sort of moved forward towards the contest, but towards the ball up. But geez, I mean, talking about robbing Peter and paying Paul $1 million.
Well, one of the footy shows over the weekend, one of the TV ones, highlighted all those times they left Petracca. They said basically you can't have Melbourne at the front of our ball ups. You can't leave it just open. We won a premiership by the Bulldogs leaving the front of our ruck contest open, and you just can't do that to Melbourne. And Hawthorn did it. They concentrated on Oliver, and they didn't concentrate on the
Exactly. Well, they put all of their eggs in the Oliver basket. And the thing is, again, this goes to Goody's tactical nous, is, the genius Mitchell, he's such a genius. Goody actually mentioned it in the presser that, they knew McGuinness was going to go to Oliver. So they had whole pre-season and whatever number of, Goody's an obsessive. He would have gone through every scenario, and at the top of those scenarios would have been McGuinness goes to Clary. And so plenty of time to plan their strategies, and that's what Rivers said. They just move McGuinness around away from the contest to make him basically of no value.
What was even more amazing, though, and I think again the failing of Hawthorn was, you can put someone on Oliver, that's fine, but you must put someone on Petracca as well, and you must put someone on Sparrow. And the number of times that we had no one on those players at all was astounding to me. It's not surprising that the centre clearance numbers were so huge. It's because we got such clean possession out of the middle, and of course it goes down the forward line unimpeded. So yeah, it was more on them than what we were doing. They were shocking.
Well,
Yeah, they were all over the shop tactically, weren't they?
Yeah,
it's a good thing coaches aren't listening to this podcast because you're giving them some tips on how to stop us, George. So
stand alongside your man.
Let's move on to the next one.
On track, he was super.
We're going to get to track.
He was awesome.
You can give him praise. Sure. Red and Blue Beard says injuries to May and Lever would normally make us panic. What will be our approach now in the longer term? What should be our succession plan? We won't get into succession plans yet. British Demon Fan says, I imagine there'll be lots of questions on this topic, but May and presumably Lever, pending any updates in the week, both out. The obvious replacements I can see are Petty back to defence and Tomo in, especially with Disco Turner injured. Do you guys think these will be the changes, or can you see Jed Adams getting a game? Bay Riffin asks, what did you think of our backline without Lever and May in the second half? I thought they were superb, with last-minute spoils by Howes, T-Mac, then Track saving 3 shots on goals. Our defence is really humming, so good signs. And finally, D Old Fart asks, the question of the week is obviously how we cover the May and probably Lever absences. I'll be keen to hear your solutions and potential matchups versus Port and the Crows. Mrs. D Old Fart and I are heading off tomorrow to drive to Adelaide. The pod is certain to keep us well informed and entertained for the first part of the trip. Maybe the whole trip, the way we're going. Keep up the great work, guys. Go Ds/Redleggers. We'll hope you are driving safely, D Old Fart. Before I throw to George, the medical report is in. Stephen May sustained 2 fractures to his ribs and a small transverse process fracture to his vertebrae in his collision with Barbie Old Chol late in the second quarter. He's going to miss the match against Port Adelaide, and they're going to monitor his pain and function following that in the lead up to our Adelaide game. I reckon there's a good chance he misses that too, but they've listed him on the injury report as 1 week, but we know that's not always accurate. Jake Lever, who sat out the majority of the second half after he landed quite innocuously in a spoiling contest, has been cleared of major injury to his right knee. He looks to have irritated a joint under his kneecap. The club are optimistic he will be available for Saturday night's game against Port, but we'll see how he responds this week at training. He was apparently training according to our track watchers, he was training this morning, working with the rehab group. He had his knee strapped up, but was moving well. So there's a chance he is playing, but there's a chance he may miss this week. So there's a lot to unpack here, George. So perhaps start with the impact of us losing 2 such important players to our defensive setup during the match, and not just from a footy perspective, but from a leadership perspective as well. They're effectively coaches on the field, marshalling the troops, making sure everyone is where they need to be. How do you think we responded during the game? And then you can get into your thoughts on how we navigate these next few weeks without either one or both of them, and then who comes in to replace them. We may as well do the changes for that part of the ground there, and then B-Man, you can jump into.
There's a lot in this, and once again, I'd encourage our listeners to go to the Demon Land site, and because we've got experts on here now, we've got genuine experts as opposed to people who run a lot of conjecture. Firstly, have a look at Webber's post. Webber I think he's a physiotherapist, but he's certainly got a medical background. He gives, in his post on this matter on Demon Land, an accurate assessment of both, certainly of Stephen May's injuries. And he was absolutely correct when he was talking about it before it came out in the media today. Basically, as long as there's no displacement in the ribs, which apparently there isn't, he's got cracked ribs, and it's a case of as long as you can put up with the pain, and believe me, the pain is considerable, then you can play. The ribs won't repair themselves for quite some considerable time, but things won't get worse. The transverse vertebra, the little wings that are on the edge of the vertebra, they're used apparently, according to Weber, to attach muscles to. But they can have cracks in them and they won't affect anything. It's only when the actual central column component of the vertebra is cracked, which is dangerous because that's where the spinal cord goes through. So that's the first thing. Read what Weber says and you'll get an accurate assessment of the injuries. The other one that you need to read is Kev Martin's training reports from today. He even provided photos of Lever at training. Throwing away the bandages at the end that he'd been wearing.
I think that was walking civil war.
Was it? Okay, well, they were both doing a good job together. The reports indicate that they're out there on the training track. They've got Lever at least has got, 10 days till the next game. So that's promising. If the injury isn't as what we first thought or as bad as what we first thought, he's got plenty of time to recover, but we've got to see that. The good news is exactly what happened in this game. When we lost our two major defenders, it was absolutely seamless. There was no change whatsoever in the way that they operated. We had the right people. We were fortunate in having Haw there as a defender who knew the systems, and has got a long history as a defender as well. So that's fantastic. Team Mac went to the fullback position, slotted in beautifully in there. We dropped Salem back to provide some extra cover as well. Petty went back, of course. It was as strong as we could possibly make up, not just on the day, but I suspect that's going to be much the same as what we'll see in the coming weeks. I think the subsequent question is going to be, if Petty goes back, who moves forward? What are we going to do about the forward line?
We'll talk about that in a minute.
But we're going to talk about that coming up. But I can't see us making any major changes. I at this stage wouldn't even be bringing Tomlinson back in. I think he was dropped from the Sydney game because he doesn't seem to follow the systems as well as the others. Marty Haw certainly proved that he did. Petty certainly proved that he was capable. Why would you change something that's been working? In the coming weeks, we've got the two big gorillas we've got to face are Charlie Dixon and Tex from Adelaide. I think T-Mac can cover both of those successfully. I don't know that either of the sides have got much beyond those in terms of the forward line. They've got Marshall from Port Adelaide.
Finlayson.
Yeah. But we can cover all those type of players easily. It was the gorillas are going to be the problem, and I think T-Mac can do that.
I reckon, or just on Weber's an orthopedic surgeon, I think. So,
yes, you're right.
But I don't think he does his own research. And on my research on Stephen May, I didn't need to hear from some fancy schmancy to tell me that he's got wings and whatever he's got. I saw it, and I said to my mate that I went to the footy with, "Don't worry, I don't care. He'll be back in 2 weeks. So I'll strap it up and he'll come back on." It was a pretty nasty hit though. He was in pain for a long time. He was on the ground for a long time. So I stayed in hospital overnight. But yeah, I don't need Weber to tell me that Maisie will be back in 2 weeks. It'll be more difficult keeping him away than I reckon than anything else. So it's interesting, George, that you're spot on. I actually think Tomo will come in. You're spot on about how the system was incredible, how smoothly that worked. And T-Mac, I think, needs a lot of credit for his sort of calmness down back. And not, we talked about this last week. I think that's why he's in the team ahead of Tomo, because of exactly what you said. His ability to play in a very fluid system that really requires players to move on and off different players. I think this week, I think Tomo will come in because he's a good fit for Dixon. Dixon will not expose Tomo's sort of relative lack of pace. I think he's a perfect matchup for Tomo. Tomo could even run off Dixon. Dixon's so slow. So Dixon's hugely strong, but so is Tomo. So I think he's the perfect matchup. I would start Hoare on the bench and start Tomo if need be. Swap him out if you want some more run and you're not getting enough run, and we need a bit more run from halfback. As we've talked about, these are the sort of decisions when you have a new game style that's about scoring from the back half. You need run from the back half. That's another factor I think why Tomo would struggle to be in the team, because he's not hitting those high-risk kicks. He's not a bad kick, but he doesn't take them on and he's not quick enough. So, but I'd be picking him. I think it's a no-brainer. But the other element to the game, apart from how well our system stood up and the pieces of the puzzles in Lever and May were replaced, I think, again, the critical thing was our all-team defence. And I'm really of the view that the media, as a general thing, when they're analysing Melbourne, it's sort of like an afterthought. They always say Melbourne are number one for defence, but they don't give us enough credit for what that does on the opposition. So, as I said, that first quarter for me was more about what we did to them defensively than what Mitchell did. I mean, he said it, as I said, he said in his presser, he was trying to move the ball forward. That was the instruction. He joked. The joke wasn't to just kick it back and forward, in their back half. It was to get incisive and move it, but we just stopped them. Key to that whole model, interesting as I noted, I've heard 4 player interviews all say this same thing. So there's obviously a theme. Melbourne football is defense and contest. That's it. That's and everything else is a bolt on, but doesn't matter what we look like. And that all-team defense is just the absolute sort of heart of our game. And Trent Rivers is asked about what was most impressive for him in the last couple of wins, and this is his response, Andy.
What's been the big takeaway over the last couple of weeks in regards to the change and what's worked really well for you?
I think just a full team buy-in to defence. We pride ourselves on our team defence, and I think we've all seen that effort that Track did, late in the game. That's something, and every single player that was near him got around him, and I think that's something that we talk about bringing joy and happiness to those around us, and I think that's one of those actions, definitely something that does that. So, yeah, definitely the full team buy-in to the defence.
I just think that's so important to the Melbourne game of football. And I think, it always gives you an advantage if you've got good defence. But I think of all the teams, not only have we got the best defence, is that we've got the defence best suited to mitigate the high, fast transition football from the back half. The big worry for the Pies, and I think also Port, is that they push up so high up the ground that they're exposed out the back. All teams are going to be exposed out the back when the ball's moving fast up the ground. That's just the nature of it. But I think our defensive system is the best sort of set to at least mitigate the impact of that. We'll open Port up if they push too hard and we're moving the ball well. So the other thing that on the weekend, I thought our all-team defence was just as important as what Hoare and our key defenders and T-Mac did after Lever and May went down. Everyone was helping out. And again, watching from the top of the Ponsford stand, it was just a joy to watch because you can really see that grid set up. And as George said, the other tactical win in that first quarter for us was we were wasting no energy washing across the ground, no contest. We weren't getting hit. When it's a helter-skelter up and down the ground game like the Swans game was, for instance, or, they're flat out, they're getting tackled. It's just so intense. It was anything but intense. And watching at the G, at the top of the Ponsford, what you really get to understand that you don't on the wing is that no one's running 60 metres in that grid. They're only running to the edge of their area, so that only might be 40, 50 metres, and everyone moves across sort of not quite a domino effect. So no one's really going flat out with no pressure. Melbourne would love that game. 23 more of those games Goody would love. His players aren't going to get banged up and we win the game of footy. I mentioned before that all-team defence, that Track example was brilliant. I didn't even think it was Track. He moved so quick. I thought it was one of the defenders. I thought it was Marty Hoare. But was the one that jumped out to me was Maxi running flat out, flat chat, 70 metres, I reckon he ran. Down towards the southern stand, and he to get across. We're already 5 goals up or something, 6 goals up, to get across and man a mark and stop them kicking it on. I thought, wow, that's leadership, but 2, that is just a complete and utter commitment. A guy's 6'7" at 3/4. I think that was even in the last quarter. just expends everything he's got to stop them moving the ball forward. I thought it was just a brilliant bit of play by Gawn.
Let's talk about the forward line impact without May and Lever. The injuries to May and Lever, it all also impacts the forward line. And Bigfoot writes, the injuries to May and Lever can be somewhat covered in the short term. The spanner that these injuries throw into the works is in our forward line. We obviously had a plan with playing Petty in the forward line to give Ben Brown a chop out in the next few weeks, especially with the 5-day break between the Port and Crows games. What happens to the plans to manage and nurse Ben Brown through the next few weeks with Petty going down back? Do we bring Fullerton in? Does Tomo come in and either Petty or T-Mac go forward? Interesting times. Hopefully everyone is well drilled in the systems for there to be minimal disruptions during this crisis. Crisis, bit heavy word there. The injuries to May and Lever, not only had a positional impact on our forward line with the plan to play Petty up forward being paused, but it also impacts us tactically in being able to seamlessly nurse Big Betty Brown through this upcoming block of matches that are close together. Big Man, have these injuries thrown a spanner into the plans, and how do you see the makeup of our forward line in the coming weeks? And I will add, our track watchers at training today did observe that Petty was still training with the forwards today.
Yeah, well, that doesn't surprise me at all. I think that, as I said, I think the obvious move, if Lever plays, then there's actually no big change to the system at all. I would have Tomo comes in, replaces straight swap for May. He goes to Charlie Dixon. Between Tommy Mack, that they look after, they find a way of looking after Marshall. Petty starts forward, Hoare starts sub, and Hoare comes on, as a defender at some point in the game. And you could engineer that to give, for instance, it gives them a lot of flexibility. If they do think that Benny Brown needs a chop out, well, Petty can go forward if he Petty is already forward, but T-Mac can come forward as well, replace. You've got a lot of options with Hoare, because he also can go to halfback flank. He can, play, as I said before, freeing up Rivers maybe to move forward or to play more time. So I actually don't. Lever's the one that's key. So if he plays, then really, if you just do a straight swap for Tomo and May, nothing really changes. Petty starts forward. I thought Petty's mark. Say again.
If Lever doesn't play this week.
Well, then for me, the obvious one is Hoare comes into the starting 22, takes the Lever role. Tomo comes in, takes the Steve May role, and then you use Woden potentially on the bench. Or I didn't see much of or hardly any of the Casey game. It doesn't sound like anyone's really putting their hand up. But Woden seemed to be the next one up, and Goody's been pretty consistent with that. It hasn't he sort of indicates who's next up. We've got Hunter coming back, not this week, but he should be right, the following week potentially.
Now, we're still talking primarily about the back line, but we're not talking about the forward line because...
Well, Petty stays forward?
All right, yes, no. That happens this week. I'm talking about we've got a 5-day, going into a 5-day break next week.
Well, if all things being equal, there's no in-game injuries. That's the advantage of having Hoare, because Hoare can replace.
Hoare can't replace Ben Brown.
Yeah, he can, because then you just move it around. So, let's say Ben Brown needs to come off, right? You move Tommy Mack forward, and then Hoare comes on for Tommy Mack.
So in the Adelaide game, I can't. If Ben Brown plays a full game, or plays a game against Port. And I know we're jumping ahead weeks to 1 week at a time.
But when you've got a swingman like T-Mac, who's kicked, he was second in the Coleman 1 year. So, he won us a flag in 21 playing as a forward, you could argue, T-Mac. So, as I said, Benny Brown needs a chop out. Hoare replaces T-Mac in the defence and T-Mac replaces Brown, or, Petty goes back and T-Mac comes forward.
Lever should be back by the Adelaide game if he doesn't play.
Yeah, so it actually, it's, it would be a much bigger deal if it was Lever and May, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the problem is what we saw at the weekend at Casey. I don't think there are any of the big men would be brought forward into the AFL, so any of them.
Well, that's a real worry. Included. Especially on Burrell. That's the one that
I thought Fullerton would be worthwhile coming in. He was he was completely useless in the game, and he wasn't alone in the big men. Adams did absolutely nothing. Varel fought manfully, I suppose, is the best you could describe it, but he isn't being played forward. That will give us another option. But Shaki took 3 marks, did very little.
Yeah, those 3 marks were nice leads.
Yeah,
goals, and that's all he did.
And that's all he ever does. So, there were none of the big men really said, "Pick me next week."
It was a big wake up call in terms of our big man depth, and I don't know, they've got some improvement on the thing, but at the moment I'm not enthused by anything, and we'll talk more about Case later. I only watched half, but wasn't too enthused.
Both halves were awful.
Yeah.
But I can tell you for something for free, we're not the only club struggling for big men. I mean, it's really every club seems to be. McStay out for the Pies is a massive out all season. To keep these big fellas ticking over.
We better make hay while the sun shines, because we've got May's not getting any younger. T-Mac and Big Benny Brown are probably going to retire at the end of the year.
It's another discussion. I don't reckon we should be over and spending too much capital on forwards. We've got, forwards ain't where it's at. Exactly like Daniel Hoyle said, is where it's at is players like Goulden. That's who we should be focusing. We should be moving. And what's his name? The young guy down at Geelong that was a high pick that is it Holmes. That's who we should be targeting. Not our, of course, another key forward would be great, but we really need, they're the difference makers in footy at the moment.
Anyway, long time until we start talking trades and whatnot. But, All right, let's get on with it. Demon WA says, about 10 minutes into the game, I was completely relaxed knowing we'd win by 5+ goals. Opposition coaches are scared to kick the ball long and risk turnover to Gawn, May and Lever. I hadn't seen such spineless ball movements since the Neeld era Demons. Question is, does the panel think teams will move the ball with more confidence against a side missing Lever and May? I'm quietly confident when we have the depth to cover them. I'd probably favour Petty going back with Tomo and T-Mac. Same forward line as round one, should be okay. Well, we've talked a bit about this, but Georgia, what did you think about the Hawks ball movement to try and negate our elite defensive setup? And do you think teams will try to take advantage of a perceived diminished defence in the coming weeks?
Without May and Lever, yes, we're not going to be as good as what we are with them in the side. But I'll just reiterate what Binman's been talking about, and that's the total team defence. It's not dependent on the back six alone. It's dependent on the next six up the field. The ball doesn't even, as Hawthorn found out in this game, the ball doesn't even get inside 50 where the back six operate. It doesn't even, they get it to the halfway point, and through Binman's statistics, that's why the time in forward half for both sides was much the same. They didn't go beyond the forward half. It stopped at the 50-metre line every time because the team defence works. So the situation's going to be the same for next week and for every other team that comes up against us. The total team defence means that everybody has to contribute further up the ground, not just the back six. Yes, we'd love to have Lever and May back in the side, and we may only be missing them for a couple of weeks, but it's not going to advantage other sides as much as perhaps what they think because of the way we play.
There was a question we had. I may as well bring it here. There's no way to put it, but Fat Tony asked, how certain are you that Salem won't be moved from the midfield? So it looks like if we do have it, do you think Salem's going to play more?
I think that was in reference to the fact that he played 3/4. After we said last week there was no way that he was going to be moved back. But I can't recall. He didn't have any centre-bounce attendances. And Swallow this week. Had plenty. Sparrow this week had plenty, but Salo didn't have any. And I've meant to watch the first quarter again before the show ran out of time to work out where Salo was playing in that first quarter. But I'm pretty sure he was still taking stoppages around the ground, Salem.
Yeah.
But went back to provide some leadership and defensive cover when we lost Lever and May is my take on it.
I'd be amazed to find out how many possessions he had in the last quarter, because he had 20 in total. I reckon 19 of them were in that last quarter as he held the ball and just distributed left, right, and wherever he wanted to.
when I was training the other week for the captain's run on Friday before the game, they were practicing.
Did you say when you were training or when you were at training?
I was at training.
Right, okay. It's a slight difference.
When I was at the captain's run. So they were just doing some stoppage practice where they sort of had the uneven numbers at the stoppages, and the main group our main group was the uneven number, had less numbers, but that we were using Salem as like a spotter out, away from the, sort of 5, 6, 7 meters off the pack, but communicating with our midfield of how many numbers they had around the ball. So I thought that was interesting, using Salem sort of a spotter, sort of off the stoppage.
And I mean, the other thing about Salem going back is it's what George has talked about, a lot over the last 2-3 years, and what I've talked about as well is how important systems are to Goody. Now, I said before that it's never going to not be this. It's defense number one. That's the demon is defense for Goodwin, and then the contest. But that system has taken him since 2016. He was in charge of our defense in 2016 under Roos. So, we're looking 8 years to build what he's got now, and it's it is so fundamental to the Melbourne game plan, and the players know it so well that you've got players like T-Mac who could be out of that system for 2 years and slot straight back in. Ditto Hawes, ditto Howes. His third game, he looks like he's been playing in that system for bloody 5 years. And then you've got how fantastic is it that you've got a player of Salem's quality that you can take from the midfield and put him at halfback flank, and you've still got Bowser, who's going to come back in a few weeks. It's that all of that work that he's put in and the team have put in getting that defensive system right is a starting point for so much else. And as George notes as well, it's funny you should say that, George, because that's what Lyon said in his presser. He was asked about their marks or their forward line, and he sort of in the post-match presser, and his way of being dismissive, he's hilarious to listen to, but his way of being dismissive was he brought it back to defense. He said, well, all of that what happens up the ground in the forward 50 arc is only works and only happens if the defensive systems are all working. And Goody's got the same philosophy. So, he thinks of defense is the same as offense. If you can't get your defense right, your offense isn't going to work.
Singer says Petracca was absolutely huge in this match. Some of his work out of the middle to pinpoint passes to JVR and Fritsch were just phenomenal. His goal off one step from just inside 50 was immense. He's an absolute bull. The Hawks chose to target Clary, who still had a solid game, but all it did was allow Track to get off the leash. Lever to Diva adds a great response from all the team when Tracker ran all the way back to play defender and spoil a certain Hawks goal. You would have thought from the response that he kicked the sealer. Wonderful esprit de corps, if that's spelt right, and no, you did not spell that right. It bodes well for us, and we are obviously hungry. P.S. Goody got it right again. Now we've just got some audio. We had a late call-in from Redleg 23.
Good evening, gents. This is Redleg 23. Just how good was the weekend? And I just wanted to give this player, and it's an obvious one, and it probably seems weird as to why I'm saying him, because he gets his flowers all day, every day. But, I mean, the applaudiments couldn't be any more higher than such a player of Christian Petracca's ilk. He was just superb on the weekend. And it just got me thinking, boys. I mean, he is the reason why you love footy, isn't he? He's so dynamic. He brings you along with the highs as well as the lows as well in terms of, he might, be a little bit iffy with his disposal every now and then, or he might fumble a couple of times when you least expect it. But then again, he'll do what he does on the weekend and just absolute shoot darts to Bailey Fritsch and wins the ball out of the centre and scores goals from 50. And then, I mean, the biggest thing for me on the weekend was the fact that, him going with a flight of the ball to spoil that forward 50 entry when, he had no right to really even think about doing that. But, the way he double fist the air and you got Maxi coming up to him and Petty, that just says so much. And we're just so blessed to have a guy like Christian Petracca wearing our colours, because he's not only a special player, but he's just as special off the field. And he's just so huge for our club, socially as well. He's an absolute diamond. That's all I wanted to say, boys, was just to say congratulations to Christian and the player that he's becoming. And maybe there's captaincy not too far away. Who knows? So, guys.
It was a massive game from track. 29 disposals, 11 score involvements, 8 inside 50, 6 clearances, 4 goal assists, 1 goal. And as we've mentioned, and Redleg 23 mentioned it, that crucial defensive half spoil. No to opposition teams. So if you're going to choose to tag Clary, you're going to have to deal with Track and Viney and Sparrow and Binman. No. How good was
yes.
Track?
Amazing. I mean, Redleg 23 could not agree more. Like, perfect. That's exactly. I've been critical of his fumbles in the last 3 weeks, but it's probably ridiculously, it's trying to find a flaw in a diamond. And isn't that what gives you value? I'm not sure about diamonds, but he's incredible. Right. His game was just phenomenal. In addition to those stats that you mentioned, Andy, he also had a player rating of 22 for the game, 22.5. The players put a lot of stock in that player rating. It's a really so does the AFL. I talked about this last year. So does the clubs and the AFL generally. It's often used in their contract negotiations and stuff. So it's a serious number in terms of it being respected across the AFL. He hit 22.5. To put that in context, he had great games in his first 2 games as well. 18.6 in round 0, or opening round, whatever it was called, and against the Dogs last week, his player rating was 18. He went up a level. He got 5 coaches votes last week, and he got the full 10 this week. And his player rating was 22.5. Sort of from context for that is that there's a question about Nibbler, and so I had his numbers up as well. And I thought Nibbler had another terrific game. He's had a great start to the season. But for context, in terms of that 22.5 player rating, Nibbler's player rating for a good game, I thought, was his player rating was 10.8. It just gives you a sense of how crazy good Track's game was. I'm not sure about how useful fantasy points and Supercoach are, but they give some sense of numbers, I guess, the raw numbers. Track's Supercoach score was 146 and his fantasy points were 109. It was just a unbelievable display, and his kicking was great. He fumbled early and I thought, oh no, here we go again, but he really cleaned that up. And his kicking was just unbelievable. I really think he's better just kicking off one step, because technically it looks better, or pivoting onto his right. And that energy, like Rivers earlier in that interview that we played before, he was asked about, well, everyone seems happy and like up and about. And he said, well, they've had a real focus. The club's had a real focus on enjoying things and being, enjoying their footy and getting back to the basics. And that's what that was all about, how happy they all were. And the joke was, apparently, they heard Track say, the joke was he averages 1 defensive effort like that a year, and he's had one already, which was the byplay between him and Goody when he came off the ground after that, because he's done and dusted his one huge defensive effort.
Ed Langdon, Smurf says, welcome back, positive Lingers. Thought Ed Langdon played his best game for the Demons in a long time, along with Windsor and Billings. We have genuine weapons on either side of the ground. And I think that Ed, that probably was one of his best games since his rib injury 10 games into the 2022 season. 26 possessions, 6 intercept possessions, 4 tackles, 4 score involvements, 3 inside 50s, 3 marks, 2 clearances. George, how'd you see Ed's game?
Fantastic, wasn't it? Again, one of our Demon Lane posters in one of the threads said it took Ed 12 months to come back from his rib injury. Let's hope it's not the same for Stephen May. But yeah, Ed's fantastic. And I think the big difference what we're seeing is actually the presence of both Windsor and Billings into the side. Ed, I don't know what the numbers were for Ed in terms of on ground time, but they seem to be rotating both sides of the ground, and it's good for Windsor in particular, because you don't want to run the kid into the ground. but Billings is also a lethal threat with his kicking ability. Wins is a lethal threat with his running ability. And then you've got Langdon on the other side with both sort of things. So, it's a nice combination of rotations that goes through the middle. And we were talking about the overall team defence. They're the first line. They're the guys who get across the ground to cut off the switching that some teams still persist with. They look up and there's nowhere to go because Ed Langdon's already sitting there on the wing waiting for them to kick it to. He's the first line. Billings and Windsor are learning the skills on the other side as well. It's a great team effort. So, yeah, love to see Ed at his best. It's very enjoyable.
92% for Ed, 82 for Windsor, and 80 for Billings in time.
Yeah. See that? So Ed's spending less because I remember last year it was 100 virtually for every game. So we're spreading the loads around with this. So that's good to see.
T-Mac was 100, by the way.
Yeah, team.
All right, let's move on. Pingu says that's the Bailey Fritsch we pay to see each week, outbodying defenders, taking speckies and kicking sausage rolls. 5 goals brings his tally to 9 for the season. If he kicked straight last week, he would be putting his hand up for a Coleman. Mo Sislak says Fritsch is criminally underrated, up there with Toby Green for being pound for pound one of the best users of the body in the AFL. So another bag of goals for Fritter. Pingu's right. Had he kicked straight last week, he'd be equal with Jesse Hogan in the Coleman if he'd kicked all 3 last week. I saw a stat last week that he's kicked the fifth most goals in the competition since 2021. And remember that he did miss a chunk of games last season. And this week he also slotted into the top 10 most goals by a Demon. And to Mo's point about him being one of the best users of the body in the AFL, for a player that seemingly has a very slight frame, he outbodied Sicily a number of times, and I don't necessarily you don't have to put it down to strength. It's just the way he uses his body and the momentum, and I just love it. Big Man, your thoughts on Bailey's game?
Fantastic game, and as I said, I take full credit for it after giving him a bagging last week. But I thought it was, again, another great bit of coaching by Goody, because we've talked a bit about the big sort of, I think the gap that we've got up forward, is leaving aside the marking targets, which at the moment is okay, is the defence. Don't call him a defensive forward Melksham role. And that player who can take the opposition's best intercepting defender, like you saw the Crows who Melbourne would have put our best intercept, someone on Stewart to minimise his impact. That's what we've been doing. That's what Melksham has been doing. And so it was super clever, I thought, for a couple of reasons, for Fritsch to go with Sicily. One, because he's been a bit down on form and his possessions were low last week. Sicily's going to take him to the ball, and I've heard Fritsch interviewed, and he said exactly that it was great because he took him to the ball. Two, Sicily is a brilliant mark. He's a brilliant player. I reckon one of the best one-on-one. I've heard a stat. He's so far the best one-on-one defender in the AFL. It's not funny. Huge importance to their game, and particularly their transition game. But Fritter, I totally agree with that comment. He is the most underrated player. I reckon he was 4 on that list. He might have even been 4, Andy, on that. If he was 5. And the other players in that's got most goals since 21 were Kerno and
Hawkins.
Yeah, it's like, so he's up there with, he's been our leading goal scorer for 3 years in a row. He was just pipped Cozzy last year. And he is about I reckon in the AFL, he would be right up in the top 10 one-on-one against almost anyone. He's so brilliant one-on-one. And so he was a great matchup. He was such a good matchup for Sicily. Sicily, if you look at his numbers, 50% of his disposals are those back and forward kicks in the first quarter. So he really limited the impact of Sicily critically in terms of intercept marks, because that's what the opposite. That's what Mitchell wants out of him, is to take the sort of intercept marks that Lever takes. So in this match, speaking of player rating, so remember Track, Fritter. 15.9, and am I right in saying he's got 8 coaches' votes as well for that game against the Hawks?
I posted
pretty
it
sure-
today on Demonland, and it's gone out of my head. But while you keep talking, I'll
Yeah, so I think he got coaches' votes, which tells me that both coaches recognise the role he played on Sicily and the importance of that role. So he got 8. I think Track got 10. And he was second, wasn't he, Fritch? So he got 8.
Yeah,
that is a big tick from both coaches, probably 4 each, you'd think, as a real indication of how effective he was. I thought he did a brilliant job. There was some question marks on Demonland in the post-game thread about his defensive work. I thought it was excellent, partly because his defensive work directly on Sicily, but two, he laid a couple of absolute cracking tackles, including one that I thought he was going to get pinged for unduly rough play or whatever it is, that sling tackle. He went at 76, 77% disposal efficiency. He had 13 disposals. Time on ground, this is a sort of a number for George, 94% of time. So he barely, he didn't go off the ground very often. He's predictive rating for this. So Willow does predictive rating for each game to get a sense of where, what the expected score for him is, was 8.4. So he almost doubled the predicted player rating coming into that game. So just a brilliant game from Bailey, and great to see him kicking goals as well. What did he kick? He kicked 4-1, was it? 5-1, 2 of which were the courtesy of Track just absolutely nailing him.
Speaking of time on ground, and we're waxing lyrical about giving Ben Brown a rest. He said 96% time on ground.
And I think T-Mac was 100.
Yeah, well, I just said that before. T-Mac was 100, yeah. All right. Master Chief says, by the way, I found that the most goals since the start of 2021, Tom Hawkins, 179, Taylor Walker, 171, Charlie Cameron, 170, Jeremy Cameron, 159, and Bailey Fritch, 156, rounding up the top 5.
I yelled out Coleman after his last goal, and then he missed the next one. So,
so maybe he's got to be quiet at the footy. Yeah. Hey, man. All right. Master Chief says our small forwards shone once again. 3 goals to Pickett, 2 goals to Chandler. Have we found the perfect small roving forward mix? Will Charlie Spargo be able to work his way back into the side? So, George, our 2 small forwards, Cozzy and Chin, they've kicked 10 goals between them in the past 2 weeks. This is exactly the output that we want from our Mosquito fleet.
Yeah, it's exactly, and I put it down to the presence of Ben Brown. He does bring the ball to ground. He didn't bother the scorer in this game, if I remember. But it's his ability, firstly, to take a big opposition defender, moves them away, and guess what? Second week in a row, the small forwards have got bags of goal, including Fritch this week. So Hawthorn, apart from Sicily, haven't got much in the way of a backline with Frosty and Hardwick. But our smalls have certainly taken full advantage of the presence of Ben. I think he adds a lot to it. I just hope he can stay on the ground. We'll talk about that for next week. We're probably going to need him more than what we want to do at this stage in the season, but it's great, and it's just such confidence building for these small forwards. Chin was probably a little bit down, particularly in the Sydney game, but he's come back strongly. Cozzy is just amazing. Just keeps getting the goals that nobody else can get. Fritch providing a great target and his accurate kicking. What more can you want in the forward line? It's fantastic to see.
Red Jacket says, all the nibbler knockers need to take a good hard look at themselves. He was excellent today. That is all. So, Big Man, what do you have to say to all the nibbler knockers out there? And by the way, nibbler knockers could be your band, your cover band.
Nibbler knocker. I'm glad you said cover band. I was like, where are you going with that, Andy?
I don't know.
It's the nibbler knockers. Well, I reckon I can almost give up protecting nibbler. There's less and less nibbler knockers even at the footy, and another, I would say, solid game by Nibbler. Not his best, but it just shows. I watched him a little bit. Again, it's the top of the Ponsford, you get a really good view of a sense of how far they run, and he just runs himself stupid. Like I said to my mate that I went to the footy with, one of those runs I'd be puking up. He does it 20, 30 times a game, and same as Langdon. It's incredible there, his endurance, Nibbler. Another strong game. So he got 4 coaches' votes, and
he would have got, based on the breakdown, 3 and 1. So
3 from Goody.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
Right. Well,
Pickett got 3 and 1.
Right. Well, he wouldn't have got too many coaches' votes. Goody would give him because he knows the role, and so would Mitchell. So 4 coaches' votes is probably a good indication of how well he played. So interestingly, his player rating was 10.8. And last week it was 10.6. He averages around that mark. So it's slightly above what his predictive rating was, but just another super solid game. 75% disposal efficiency. And I think that's for the Nibbler knock, because, the knock has the strongest criticism of most consistent criticism he's faced is disposal and decision making. And both of them have been brilliant this year. 76% is above Salo, for instance, and no one can say they don't play a similar role. He doesn't get easy kicks. Alex Neil-Bullen, and as I've said a million times, is it needs to be factored in, is that he is in red time in terms of his aerobic. He's peaking 60% of the time he gets the ball. He's at the end of a 100-meter flat-out run, so that should be factored into his disposal efficiency. He had 4 contested possessions. I thought 2 clearances, 4 marks. Another terrific game, and the big one actually that was interesting for Nibbler, and this is a really good number. He got a couple of goals, didn't he, in this game? So he had 7 score involvements, which was right up there. The only player that had more score involvements was Track, who had 11 score involvements. Nibbler and Bailey Fritsch both had 7, and of course 5 of Bailey's were his goals. So another impressive game by my boy Nibbler.
Just trying to look up if you could see how many kilometres he went. I'm trying to look on the AFL site, but it's so crap.
On the tracker numbers, I actually looked at them afterwards, and surprisingly, the fastest player on the ground, like in a sprint, who would you guess?
For us,
Windsor.
Yeah.
No, Howes.
Ooh.
He was the fastest sprint on the game in the match, and the player who covered the most distance was Langers, and Nibbler second, I think.
Yep, that's who I would think. All right, JVR as the second ruck option. Lazy says, I originally wasn't a fan of having JVR do so much ruck work this early in his career, but he competes hard, and it seems to be a good way to get him into the game. For a young key forward positions like him, there are games where you find it hard to get a kick. Keeping him involved could only help. Thoughts on this? So no, and I think this is more from Lazy. I know Big Man will probably say he's not like other young talls, would relish the challenge and doesn't need the cotton wool treatment. So George, I know you've been in the don't rob Peter to pay Paul camp for a long time. Having Petty and Brown in the side and Bailey kicking a bag and the small forwards hitting the scoreboard afforded us the flexibility to play JVR in that role as that backup ruck to Max. The coming weeks may stretch us thin down forward, and that's unless Fullerton gets a call up, but we don't think he will. Thoughts on JVR as a second ruck in that role in the coming weeks?
The amazing thing I found about JVR when he goes into the ruck is that we don't lose anything. Normally when you get your second stringers of any sort for any club, that they tend to drop off, but he is really competitive in the ruck. And again, I think the advantage, what we're seeing this year is again the presence of Ben Brown. It just enables that rotation. Last year, JVR had to ruck and then go back into the forward line and play full forward, taking on the gorilla-type backman. So that additional backup, and Petty will certainly be able to provide another string to the bow in the forward line. We just don't have to play him on the ground like we have, particularly towards the end of last season when we had so many injuries up the forward line. But he's. Like I said, we don't lose anything when he's in there, and he certainly gets his hands on it, and he's surprisingly mobile. and his use of the ball is absolutely first class for a ruckman when he's playing in that role. So
how was that kick he laced out to Cozzy?
Yeah.
Just brilliant.
As well.
I don't like. Sorry, Andy.
3 clearances as well.
Yeah. And that's as a backup. So it's fantastic. Still don't like using him. He doesn't use the shin guard too, which worries me, because that's almost a recipe for a PCL injury at some stage. But at the moment he's in there, he's doing his job absolutely magnificently.
Yeah, and I'm actually I'm with you, George. I'm actually would like to see him. I'm sure I absolutely agree that with Lazy that he'd relish the challenge. That's the thing I love about him, and I've been talking about it ever since I first saw him. How competitive, how naturally competitive he is. I mean, you can let's pick Sam Wiedemann. He's left the club, so we can, or Lucas Cook. He's well and truly left the club. You could just tell those two players didn't have that natural competitive instinct. And the first time I saw JBR go for a footy, I thought, well, that's a kid who wants the ball more than anyone around him. I don't like him being in the ruck so often, just because he's not yet 21. He turns 21 in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah.
And so just like the importance of looking after Caleb Windsor and the other young players, we've got to be careful with what we've got. I'm firmly of the view that he is right up there with Ugle-Hagan, with the King brothers. He is something special, partly because of his competitiveness, but he's got clean dukes I think that's an area that he can improve. But on the lead, he reminded me a bit of the way Dunstall, the one that quick kick to him, it's stuck in his hands, and he's a brilliant kick, both a field kick and he takes his chances. So I think he only had 9 disposals or something like that. Mm-hmm. When he gets his chances, he kicks those goals. And Ugle-Hagan, as brilliant as athletically as he is, who's got a good technique, it looks like, but he's iffy on goal kicking. And how often have the three of us talked about, there but for a missed shot here or missed shot there, and a player who kicks at 72% for set shots is worth his weight in gold. So he's huge. The problem is what George said before. If Fullerton isn't the answer now, and Shackie's not the answer, who's the answer to give other than Van Rooyen? And obviously at the moment Van Rooyen's the second ruck, and we need a second ruck to give Maxi a chop out.
Nudge says, keen to get your thoughts on my new equal favourite current demon, Blake Howes. I've been waiting for this cool-headed kid to bear fruit ever since Jason Taylor again managed to steal him in the draft at 39 in 2021. Amidst doing some research on his attributes, I began to lose a tiny bit of my staunch belief of how much he'd be able to add to this side. But boy, how that belief has now been not only repaid, but well and truly transcended. So much so that I think he may have even surpassed Judd's inclusion, and that's close to my heart, for I caught him in Jan of 23 and called his potential round 1 debut, and thus take small pleasure out of spotting that alongside my 4 young'uns. Blake personifies the word balance in respect to what our defensive side needed, with his clear attributes of balance, steeliness, acumen, critical thinking, precision, adaptability, and most adroitly of all, a truly exceptional level of composure. I've also been taken with his size, reach, and closing speed, all things that have been a very nice surprise. What have you guys been most excited by, surprised with in Blake Howes? How do you think you may have put together and do you think you may have put together the 3 most underrated debutant games in the last decade? Howes' acumen has been integral to helping tighten our zone defence, which will be more vital than ever in the weeks ahead. Let's hope the rest of the footy world begins to catch on to how impressive his performances have been. So I've interviewed Jason Taylor twice in the past 2 postseasons. In each interview, I asked him about how our most recent recruits who had not debuted yet were travelling. And in both interviews, he stated that Blake Howes was on the cusp of debuting late in both of those years before injury ended his seasons. Based on that intel, for me, it wasn't a surprise that he debuted this season. What was a surprise, having not seen much of him at Casey, was how quickly he's adapted to our structures and the way that we play. And that speaks volumes of not just him, but of our systems, and how well everyone is drilled in those systems, as we were talking about the stuff that Rivers said. Because Rivers, what did he say? He said, we have a next man mentality, so whoever comes in will be ready. So Blake Howes has shown that he is ready in terms of our setup and tactics, and in his 3 games to date, he's shown that he has what it takes in terms of execution of the game plan and the necessary skills, I guess, required at the highest level. I'm a big fan already, and I can see him being the Judd McVie of 2024. Big man, are you a fan of young Blake?
Oh, huge fan. Agree with everything Nudge said. Agree with everything you just said, Andy. I'm not sure about whether the most underrated first 3 games of all time, although Bowie probably, I don't know. I would have to think about that if it was a D's one. But
he's
Judd McVie would have to be in the same
Judd
boat.
McVie, I reckon. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, well, I would say 3 things. One, what's amazing, so the question as to what's surprised me or what I've most impressive is how quickly he's taken on what it feels like is a leadership role down back, and how good his decision-making is. He's a neat kick, doesn't try too many things, doesn't try the sort of 2020 model T-Mac, I'm going to bite off that sort of super low-risk kick to the corridor. He's surprisingly good one-on-one. He's got that thing that George has talked about, what you need down back, the ability to know when to leave your man to zone off and confidently do it, not get caught in sort of no man's land, which undoes a lot of zone defenses when they haven't got it. They've clearly, as you said, they wanted him in this role for a long time. It frees McVie up. In that same audio clip from in that same the show that Daniel Hoyle was talking about, he was talking about the critical players in footy like Kitty Coleman that generate off the halfback flank. And I think McVie is going to be that sort of player for us, but he can't do that without Howes. So he's sort of got, for me, the thing that stands out about Howe is he's got the thing that really good sportsmen have in any sport, but in footy as well, is time. He's got time before, he doesn't look rushed. He makes good decisions. And you know, if the first thing isn't the right thing, he doesn't take it. Just looking at his numbers, there's a few that are really interesting. He's ranked 8th in the AFL for total intercepts, which is really amazing for a player in his 3rd game of AFL footy. That's averages. And he's ranked 6th in total marks. So that speaks to, you know, the importance of the way we're using him. Obviously, he's I'm not sure what he is for intercept marks, but, we're using him obviously as a key to our transition and moving it from our back half. And as we're going to talk a lot about this season, moving it from the back half is critical. So I think we've got a beauty on our hands, and really, you mentioned Taylor. That's another massive big tick in Taylor's column. He hasn't had many crosses, has he, Andy?
No, not many.
Bringing Taylor to the club. Who brought Taylor to the club? Was it Jackson?
I'm not too sure. I'd have to go back.
It'd be in that era, yeah.
I mean, he's it should not be forgotten the importance Taylor's played in Melbourne's success in the last decade, or ever since he's been at the club.
Yeah, I mean, you got players like Salem, Clary, and
of course we lost Jackson, but he identified Jackson and pushed for Jackson against pushback. And look at him now, Jackson. He's starting to sort of look like the player when Darcy's out, mind you.
So Howes was drafted in the year JVR was drafted. So
where's he? Western Australia? No, South Australian.
I think he's a Victorian. Howes.
Oh, okay. Oh, good. Yeah, Howes. So yeah, he's super impressive. I really like him down back and gives us some flexibility. And he's sort of sneaky tall as well. Like he can play. He looks like he can play big and sort of flexible. So it gives him some flexibility down there. That's for sure.
Morty Alec Brayside, St Bede's College, Sandringham under 19. So the Victorian.
Morty Bray.
Scroll says one smart bit of play that the D's implemented in the last quarter was a bit of tempo footy to slow things down a bit. We were chipping it around, and supporters around me were getting a bit agitated with this because we weren't going for the jugular and trying to win by 20 plus points. But they weren't seeing the larger picture. We were a man down with a healthy lead. We had have Brown and Petty and also T-Mac, who we're trying to nurse through a hectic schedule over the next 3 weeks, leading into the bye, potentially with two key figures out in defence. Slowing the play down late in the game was a smart move and meant we weren't going to overtax some of these players by playing quick footy and possibly forcing turnovers when the game was done and dusted. What do you guys think? Do you think this was an intentional strategy by Goody and the footy department, given the developments of the day and keeping in mind the next few weeks? So, George, did you notice us revert to a tempo style of play late in the game, and did you read that the same way that Scroll has as an attempt, I guess, by the footy department to slow things down, so in effect not to overtax our players?
Scroll is absolutely right on all points in this case, and as what Binman pointed out as well, why chase a high score if it's going to upset your percentage in any case, because you open yourself up for the opposition to score as well. So our percentage was much more put in a better position, I suppose, by adopting this tactic. We're already 2 players down off the field, and we've got Benny Brown and T-Mac and Petty all coming back from injuries. We don't want to be running them into the ground unnecessarily. I really liked the use of Salem. Like I said, I don't know how many possessions he had in that last quarter, but it was just take the ball, deliver it further up the field, make sure it's accurate, cause the Hawthorn players to run around and around in circles, chasing tail. It was absolutely everything that Scroll has pointed out. There's no point in trying to go for the jugular if there is no benefit. This is a very long season. We're only 3 games into it. Long way to go, so it's exactly what we needed. And the other thing is it also develops within the team concept. There'll be times in games when you're actually 5 points up or 6 points up in the game, and you need to be able to do something like that. In this case, we had a couple of double advantages, but it's hard to instill into players the desire, after being so competitive all game long, to actually stop doing it. And so here was a perfect example.
Yeah, it's a good teaching moment, I guess, with a live opposition, rather than something you try to do at training. So, yeah.
An opportunity for learnings is, I think, the way we talk about it at the D's, Andy. Just 2 quick points to add to that is that bear with me for a sec. I've just got the dog barking. So go on, Andy.
Well, that we're into the next portion of our show. So do you want me to move on from that, or I'll move on? All right. All
right, sorted. The 2 things to add is that, again, it's the hallmark of apologies for listeners at home. 2 hallmarks of Goody's, another hallmark of Goody's coaching is the way he likes to control momentum. And, momentum is such a critical feature of footy, and part of the way to win is to maximise your scoring when you've got momentum and minimise the opposition's ability to score when momentum. And playing that tempo footy is a great way to do it. That's an absolutely big part of the way Goody coaches. And the other thing is just actually the threat of losing. George would know this in basketball. If you get a lead and you've got a decent lead, the last thing you want is a fast game of basketball. The same applies to footy, because that gives the opposition a chance to score. If you're slowing down and taking 2 minutes and kicking it around, you're just eating time out of the clock that the opposition can't use to score. If you get into a fast game, that's that Richmond Port game, Goody would have hated that game. So it was exciting to watch, 122 to 98, I think, or something like that, or 92 or something. It was a 30-point win in the end. Yeah, terrific to watch. But Goody would be absolutely appalled that they are giving up 90 points. And the reason they did is Port never stopped. They just went go, 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 go. And in a similar way, not quite as bad, but the Giants-Richmond game, I watched that as well. And Giants also continue attacking, which allowed West Coast to generate some scoring themselves. So if you want to win the game, the best, and you're 30 points in front, the best way is to win the game by 30, not to try and win by 100, because then you make it a fast game and you keep the opposition in it.
Casey versus Box Hill. Demonland's premier Casey watcher, Casey from Casey, contended that Casey were caught hibernating during the first quarter of their opening round match against the Box Hill Hawks. Before Casey woke up, the Hawks had already piled on 5 goals and the damage could have been more severe had Box Hill kicked straight. The Demons rallied a little in the second quarter, but it was all downhill from then on and the Hawks ran away with a 41-point win. For the D's listed players, Tomlinson was probably trying to put his hand up to fill a key defensive spot with 24 disposals. Former Lion Ruck come forward. Tom Fullerton was well beaten by a more dynamic Hawks Ruck lineup. Colton Tolstrup impressed with 18 disposals and was a cool head under pressure. Kynan Brown worked hard as well. Bailey Laurie had his moments with a goal from 21 possessions, whilst Andy Moniz, Wakefield and Tajwa Woden both had 19 touches. Josh Aki marked well a few times on the lead but could only manage the 1 goal. I watched a bit of the match and it could be a long year for Casey, particularly if the seniors have a number of injuries, and I'm sure we'll bring a squad over to Adelaide for the next 2 weeks. So look out, Casey, in the next 2 weeks. I can't imagine they're going to be winning.
Competitive.
Or competitive. I was trying to be diplomatic.
But to be fair to them, there's a lot of players who'd be playing at Casey, not able to play at Casey at the moment. So,
well, that's what I'm saying with the injuries.
Yeah.
I don't know, how much do you want to talk about it, George?
Not at all.
Wasn't much. Like I've said before, I was totally unimpressed by all of our tools. There was, it wasn't surprising, for example, that Tomo had a bucket load of possessions because he played in the back line, and guess what? That's where the ball spent most of the game. The people who are providing some enthusiasm, at least, because there certainly wasn't much right from the very first bounce, were the people like Woden, Tolstrup and Kynan Brown. Casey's been badly affected by the loss of people like Moose Munro
Huge.
Bell in the ruck, who was a big solid body.
White can't do it all, can he?
No. And I was really unimpressed by Fullerton's output. The second efforts at all were very similar to other players that we've had in recent years. Just no follow-up whatsoever. And I thought there's a big opportunity for him this week, particularly if you've come in as a ruck forward to show something, and there was nothing shown that impressed me. So,
and George, I only watched about 20 minutes of it, and I guess the player that I have, speaking of Lucas Cook, and Sam Wade, the player that I have the biggest concern about in terms of he's an important player moving forward in terms of being a key position player is Jefferson. And in 15 minutes of the game, I know they put him back, and I really, really like that idea from a development point of view. Is it's as old as footy, isn't it? Throwing someone back to get him close to the we did it with Neath.
Bailey Fritsch in 2018.
Yeah, exactly.
Played him down back.
2019, I think. Yeah.
It was 2018 because it was in the final. We made the finals.
Okay, yep.
But
so I think it's good development.
Yeah.
But I just saw a bit of play, and it just worried me because it was like he just didn't do what JVR would have done in that instance, which was run through whoever it was in front of him to mark the ball. And it just so I'm just interested, George, what your thoughts on where Jefferson's at.
I thought he was last year. I thought he was getting closer. I wouldn't have thought that he was ready to take an AFL spot, but he really hasn't progressed in any way, shape, or form. Certainly, you can't compare him with JVR. JVR was competitive from day one. You could see that. Jefferson's worry to me is he just drops the head. He knows where to go. He knows where to go, but he just drops the head.
That's what worried me. And also, it's the second efforts. Like you've got to do second efforts at all level, don't you?
Yeah, and that's what I mean by dropping the head. It's just, that's failed. No, stop. Just go in again for a second effort. Do it again. And that was always Weed's. The big knock on Weed for the same reasons, and certainly in this game it was the same. Even though he's playing down the back, he had opportunities to do something and he just didn't. But he wasn't on his own. Like I said, I was really disappointed in Fullerton, really disappointed in Adams. There wasn't much from the tools that like I said, there's an opportunity this week and the next week probably for someone to put their hand up and gain a spot and show your wares, but none of those showed that the
Well, Adams doesn't worry him so much because he's coming back from injury, isn't he? And
yeah. Farrell was given a hard job against Lloyd Meek, who's an absolute monster in the ruck.
And what about Manise Wakefield? What was his game like?
I thought he was in and out a lot. They completely overwhelmed us. All the people who were providing the a bit of the spark were the Manise Wakefield, the Lorries, the Wodens, the Kynan Brown, Tolstrup in particular. You could see that they were putting in really hard, trying their best to show their wares. They were up against a better opposition, but they were the only ones who were showing anything. The other unfortunate thing is that the Casey players really were third rate. Really third-rate players are
they also had some players
filling the gaps
from from that, not the Ammos and
the commentators were making the comment all the time that our worst enemy were our own players. They just simply kept turning the ball over, and there wasn't much skill there, unfortunately. So it was disappointing. The only one that really showed something and was a kid named Hustwaite, who got a lot of possession, showed a lot of spark as well. But the rest of the side was pretty ordinary.
All right, let's get into changes, which we've talked most about. But before we do get into that, we had a couple of track watchers out at Gosh's paddock this morning. As expected, Stephen May was absent. Demons high performance manager reckons he'll only miss a week. So watch this space. Lever, who's listed as a test, was in the rehab group today. He was joined by Ben Brown, who we've noted doesn't participate in too much training as part of managing his knee issues. Charlie Spargo listed as 2 to 4 weeks, still with an Achilles. Jake Bowie, 7 weeks with the shoulder injury. So he was 8 weeks, wasn't he, when he did the shoulder? It's a couple of weeks out from that. He's still 7 weeks. He was also in the rehab group.
As long as it's not 4 to 6.
Well, it's out of the 4 to 6, so that could be worse. Pleasingly, Jake Melksham, Shane McAdam, Lockie Hunter, and Daniel Disco Turner all resumed training with the main group. However, Jake is still listed as 12 to 14 weeks away. McAdam, 3 to 5 weeks away. It just seems to be getting longer and longer. That's the calf and then the hamstring, and those weeks just aren't going down, but good to see he's back in. Hunter listed as 1 week and Disco Turner 2 to 3 weeks. So it's good that they're all joining the main group at training. We've already talked about the potential changes as a result of injuries to May and Lever. Are there any other changes you boys think that we might make? Probably only to the side.
I don't think so, no. I reckon just Tomo for Maisie.
All right, so the D's, the preview to the Port Adelaide game, D's begin a 2-week adventure in Adelaide, leaving for the City of Churches after training on Wednesday, we've been informed, for their Saturday night encounter with Port Adelaide before taking on the Crows off a 5-day break during Gather Round. Both teams have 2 wins on the board and are sitting in the top 4. The Demons, having already lost an encounter this season against a top 4 contender, will be eager to stamp their September credentials with a win at the Powers Fortress at Adelaide Oval. Port will be keen to chalk up another early season win, especially with 2 more home games lined up after this one in the coming weeks, making that 4 home games from 5 matches. Conversely, in the D's first 5 games, they will have played 3 interstate games and only 1 game as the home team. In Victoria, you got to love AFL fixturing. So we've got some audio to play from our good friend Noah.
Hey, this is Noah from Brighton. A good win again against the hapless Hawks. The main question I have is the coming week when we go to Adelaide. What do you think is going to be our biggest issue there apart from the crowd? Just want to know whether you think we've got what it takes to go up against Port and then Adelaide the following week. Just want to hear your thoughts and opinions. And as always, go D's.
So Watson11 says, this post is mostly to get the panel's thoughts on our game strategy against Port, especially around stoppages. The between-the-arc stoppages is where the greatest score from stoppages come from, and which also determines who will be playing a forward half game. I think it is very important and generally an ignored part of tactics. So far this season, as far as scores from between the arcs stoppages goes, we are -20 versus Sydney, +14 versus the Dogs, and +15 versus the Hawks. Our structures and opponent strategies in our first 3 games was also interesting. We tend to do the same each week. Sydney tended to push +1 to stoppages. The Dogs decided to settle for even numbers at the stoppages, and the Hawks pushed +1 or +2 to the stoppages and still got smashed. Interesting in what you think will happen this week against Port. Both midfields are very good, and both defences will be suspect. Port because they always are, and us because we'll be down May and maybe Lever. Last year, Port pushed a +1 to the stoppages in the wet and smashed us. Butters had 41 possessions and 10 clearances. How do you think it will be played this week? I suspect we will do the same and push a spare behind the ball. Do you think Port will push a +1 to the stoppage again, or will they push a spare behind the ball to help their suspect defence? The good news is the forecast is 31 degrees and fine. Thanks for that, because I was going to look it up in a sec. The bad news is there is a small chance of a shower late in the day. We play at 7 p.m. So, big man, then George, what do you think of Watson 11's points about the stoppages, and then give any other thoughts you have about the match?
Well, I mean, he's right in saying the way we set up. So the short answer is that unless there's only happened a few times in the last couple of years, we always are one less down at the stoppage. So we have one less player at the stoppage. The Dogs actually did bring extras to the stoppage, 1 and 2. So if you go look at the first crack show after the Dogs game, Montagna showed vision of exactly that, of the Dogs committing numbers to the stoppages. The Pies do exactly the same. Port do exactly the same. We're really the only team that consistently has one less at a stoppage and plays that spare man behind the ball. I actually have been thinking about that in the context of one of the potential issues that we have in the wet weather, because it means that stoppages are harder to win. So we put a lot of importance and significance on the ability of Oliver and Viney and Track and Salo and Sparrow when he's there to win that contest. And it's incredible, our numbers. This year, as I said, there's a watch on them about the importance of them, because we've gone bananas against Hawke. As I noted, it was the difference in the scores. I also noted its stoppages are important for that forward half like for how well you score from the back, not forward half footy, because if you're winning stoppages in the back half, it gives you an opportunity to move the ball forward. But so it's a watch on me how important it is. I suspect it will still not be as important as turnover, it was in the Hawks game. So for the Port game, it'll be how it always will be, is that we'll play one less at the stoppage, and Port will bring an extra with the view to win that. And that's Port's problem, really. That's Port's biggest issue, is they're porous behind the ball. If you get through their last line, you've got a good chance of a walking goal. And if you get through our last line, you've got a good chance of getting smacked by May, or obviously not in this game. So, I think our stoppage winning ability, or our ability even to break even at stoppages, with the added advantage of having the man, that extra, behind the ball. And there was one play against Hawks was exactly that. We lost the stoppage and it was kicked, I think, to Rivers. And then Rivers proceeded to kick it 60, on the wing and kick it deep into our forward line. It was a classic bit of Goodwin setup. So it's going to be important in this game. They've got Butters and Rosie, they're class players. I wrote the following in terms of this match, that defensively, I think they'll struggle to cover our ball movement from the back half. And as noted on Perfect Night for Footy, our defence is really well suited, I think, to nullify their 2 key forwards, even with Tomo in for Maisie, both in terms of the way we zone off and help out that system, but also our personnel. As I said, Dixon will get Tomo will get Dixon, and Horan, Lever and T-Mac can wax and wane and cover Marshall. Offensively, they'll absolutely trouble us, and they will do what everyone was talking about Hawthorn would do, which is super fast. They're the best in the AFL at moving it from the back half, and they were last year better than the Pies, and so that's what they'll look to do. And they'll get some good looks, particularly with how good Rosie and Butters are. They are super players, but also Houston's really important. driving that transition. I'd be really curious to see if Fritsch ends up playing in the same role on Aliir that he did on Sicily, and I think that would be a really good matchup, although he might have too big a leap, but so I'll be interested on that. But I think as I've noted, our defensive system is the best in the AFL. When the team best placed to stand up defensively against that fast ball movement that Port will try against us. We've seen that against the Pies last year when we beat them, and even in the game we lost in the finals, and even in the Swans in round one. You look at what the Swans have done since they beat us. They've couldn't pick us apart the way they've been able to pick the Pies apart. And who did they beat on the weekend? They thrashed Essendon. So, I mean, speaking of defensive woes, Port just defensively, I cannot believe it looks like that Hinkley, speaking of systems, stuck to his system, which is his defensive system of being pushing up really high, that last line being really aggressive, and it's just losing football. I cannot, teams, you've got to be number 1 or to 3 or 4 in defense to win a flag, and they're never, they were 13th most points last year, for which apparently has never happened. A team's never won a flag, being that low on the table of points against. So the big one for us is getting through that last line. I reckon a genuine 50-50 game. I think we match up well against them. If I was framing a market, I'd have them favourites, but I'm quietly confident that we'll win this game.
I'm a little bit amazed by Ken Hinkley. I don't have a great deal of time for him. He's playing old-style football, dependent on individual players to get them across the line. They've got some magnificent individual players, particularly in Butters and Rosie. Butters this week was just fantastic.
Nuts, it's just nuts.
Yeah, just ridiculous. But the trouble is that, as Richmond showed in this game, they can open them up very, very easily.
Totally. That 92 points, it was because they were hopeless, Richmond, I thought.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, and the game should have been over long before it was, but they just kept leaving these holes to allow Richmond to keep coming back, and they did.
That's what the Pies model is. They push up so high that the risk reward is the reward's great, but when you're a bit off, and good teams get through it, then the risk is you give up easy goals.
But I think, like you said, I think we match up nicely. I don't think Tomlinson will come in. I think Charlie Dixon's played one season too many. He simply doesn't move out of the goal square.
Yeah, that's true. T-Mac cut him up.
Which suits T-Mac down to the ground. Marshall, I wouldn't be surprised to put Howes on in the absence of Lever. Marshall moves into that space ahead of Dixon, and he's magnificent. Mark, his kicking is certainly improved from the yips that he had the previous year. But it's their back line is absolutely fragile. They depend on Aliir, and if as you said, similar to Sicily, we put a Fritsch on Aliir, that leaves a lot of space for a couple of other players, and we may well take full advantage of that. But it is going to be an interesting battle in the middle with the grunt that we've got versus the outside run of the Butters and the Rosies. Boak, I think, despite 350 games, has gone a season too long. He was almost ineffective in this game against Richmond. And Wines isn't what Wines used to be. I reckon Viney's exceeded him dramatically from when they both first started. So it's going to be a fantastic game. It'll be interesting to see two different styles being played. But
they won't be that radically different. That's what I'm saying, is that the only difference really will be the defensive system, is because we're playing that game. That's what I was saying in the stats section. We're playing that game that the Pies have introduced of scoring from the back half, which is why I'm confident about this game, because I don't think their defensive system will cope. If we move the ball well and we do link up and we don't turn it over too often, of course you're going to turn it over probably a third of the time. It's a mistake-riddled game. But it's going to test their defense in a way that we haven't tested them before. So I think their defense is in for a real shock.
But I think they're dependent on those individuals to perform,
I agree.
rather than a system. So.
Well, particularly defensively. I mean, they use Aliir as an intercepting marker, but really you can't. He's not a one-man system.
All right. I think that is where we're going to leave it for tonight. We'll be back next week. If you want to listen to the show live, please head on over to demonland.com on Monday night at 8:30 p.m. Thank you to our 5-star reviewer on Apple Podcasts. That was Josh in London. Thank you to our commenter on Twitter, Footles. Thank you to our voicemailers, Noah from Brighton. Thank you to our caller, Enzo. And as always, your questions and comments, they do form an integral part of the show. So thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments this week. Thank you to Ross Millen, Red and Bluebeard, British Demon Fan, Bay Riffin, D Old Fart, Bigfoot, Demon WA, Singer, Leave It to Diva, Smurf, Pingu, Mo Sislak, Master Chief, Red Jacket, Lazy, Nudge, Scroll, Watson 11, and Fat Tony. Thank you to my co-hosts, George and Binman, and thank you to you, our loyal listeners who listen in every week. So don't forget to leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from. We'll read it out on the show next week. And see you next week. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.
Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on.